The girl is sitting on the ground, holding a stick in her hands, with which she is trying to move a bag lying on the street. The brunette frowns, not understanding how everything ended up like this. Someone threw out trash bags right in front of the house and left pretending it didn't happen. Having moved aside the lying garbage, the lady froze, because there was a man lying on the ground, covered in blood. He looked like a large piece of human garbage. She used a stick to brush the hair from his face. The brunette thought that the man had been dead for a long time, but he began to move. The heroine was forced to jump back, but having looked more closely, she began to realize something. The girl had seen the guy lying in front of her somewhere. He was handsome, and his snow-white hair was beautiful. This man sprinkled a perfect novel with a handful of thriller and was obsessed with murder and the main character. Avalon Lakios was the man's name, and this story happened several years ago when the girl was an orphan from the slums. Drug dealers were kidnapping unfortunate children at the time. Then the hero was pursued until he fell to the ground. The smell began to make her head hurt. When she opened her eyes, she realized that she was in a laboratory tied to a canopy. At that place, an unknown substance was injected into the orphan, which made the blood run cold in her veins. When the heroine fell unconscious, the scientists realized that she too had died. They felt no pity for the little girl, only for the fragments that had been wasted. The girl wanted to cry, but she didn't have the strength. She understood that she would die like this, and that was normal, because she knew that she had already suffered enough, and suddenly, everything turned upside down. A web formed around the body, and then the maiden fell asleep in a cocoon. When her eyes opened, it became incredibly painful. It felt as if her body was ready to break into small pieces. The child did not understand where she was. A huge spider appeared in front of her, which frightened her. The girl jumped up and tried to run away as quickly as possible. Running away without looking back, the blonde saw a panorama of her past life in which she was not a lonely orphan, but had parents and a cute dog named Coco. The gaze noticed a book lying on the table. It was called Flowerlink. The heroine read it 10 times, and then was in love with a secondary character at the end of the panorama. She died because of the car. Everything ended. There was noise all around the body. Returned to reality. Hands tenaciously tore the web. Time flew by in an instant, while in reality 3 years had passed. The substance introduced by the scientists turned out to be a fragment with an unknown power, which gave power over the web. Instead of enhancing all 5 senses, he erased them completely, drowning out emotions. Those gathered began asking about her health and mood. Of course, it wasn't very good, since in the past, the heroine died under the wheels of a truck. In her new life, normal existence was simply taken away for the sake of research on the body. The lady understood that everything was strange because she felt nothing. The woman was captured and locked in a cage. The scientists understood that Arachne was becoming stronger and knew that she might have to be isolated. Security became stricter, and the lady had little time. One day, the laboratory was attacked. Explosions were heard all around, and then Arachne realized that it was time for her to escape. Having escaped from the cage, she rushed along the corridors towards the exit. Something made her stop. A lot of people appeared in the distance. Amidst the screams, the brunette realized that the attacker was Lakios. The scientists were worried and needed to inform the director. Due to weakened senses, the lady did not even feel fear, but still hid behind one of the columns. Instead of emotions, the beauty was left with only animal instincts. There was a hum inside, and a voice seemed to repeat that if she collided with a man, she would certainly die. She did not want such a death, because it would be terrible. The scientists and defenders rushed from side to side, wanting to stop Lakios. They thought that changes had already begun in the Carnomal family. The girl still standing behind thought. It didn't take long to remember that she knew these words. It was something familiar from the novel Flowerlink. It was a thriller novel that the lady read in a past life. The book's worst villain was Avalon Lakios, who was now standing just down the hallway, approaching the people announcing that the research center would be closed. Someone tried to attack, but nothing worked, and in the end, the blonde destroyed the laboratory, sparing no one working at the institute. In Arachne's case, everything was simpler. Reincarnation, which was not even briefly mentioned in the novel, was possible. Taking advantage of the sudden chaos, the girl was able to escape and did not die. The lady remembered Avalon, whom she had come to consider human trash, and every time she shuddered at the thought of what would have happened if she had been caught by accident. The brunette dreamed, thinking that it would be great if she were born some kind of aristocrat's mistress or a masseuse. Now the lady is just a semblance of the main character, who was the daughter of a billionaire who at the time of the events disappeared after a shipwreck. What happened led to the collapse of the family and their persecution as debtors. The girl who found herself in a difficult situation, but treated everyone with kindness, found the true love she was waiting for. Because of the main villain, the maiden never saw a happy ending. He covered everything in blood. The butcher who was killing people without restraint was now close to the heroine. She saw him lying in front of her. The girl had previously learned that she had been created in a laboratory and therefore did not want to live. But over time, everything changed. She was no longer a helplessly suffocating creature, and the man was lucky that he was unconscious. Lakios won't have to suffer. He'll just die. The girl was about to finish what she started, but she heard a creak with the speed of light. She threw the body away and turned around. A blonde was standing on the threshold. She heard the noise and came. Yuri froze. She began to understand that perhaps Carnimal was not following her, but on the contrary, he came to meet Anne-Marie, who had moved into the house next door 5 months ago. On her first day, the girl came and greeted me politely. She was not against getting acquainted, but upon opening the door, the lady immediately realized who was in front of her and froze in horror. The blonde was extremely talkative. She said that she had already moved many times, but all this time there were no peers around her. She only had a younger sister with a large age difference. The beauty was happy, realizing that she would finally have someone new to know. She introduced herself as Anne-Marie Blunt and explained that her sister's name was Hestia. The brunette realized that there was no way she could be mistaken, since the main character was standing in front of her. Yuri just didn't understand what the girl was doing in such a place and why she had come. Although Anna-Marie's fate in the original is terrible, she still saves Lakios, who fell right in front of his house, and a connection is formed between them. Upon learning of those who hurt the lady, the man kills them all. Things went so far that in the second half of the novel, Blunt saved Avalon again, but in the end, she wished Yuri to stay away from the girl. Somehow, fate brought them together. The beauty also told that she recently ran into another neighbor. She heard that the new neighbor works in a large coffee shop, which is most likely located on Blue Pirate Street. Frowning, the lady rudely asked what would happen if it was true. Anne-Marie began to apologize abruptly. They had met recently, and she started asking something personal right from the doorway. It was more like rudeness. The blonde planned to start working at the treatment center opposite the cafe. For some reason, the lady strongly resembled Coco. She had the same pitiful look as the dog. The brunette decided not to put too much pressure on her and nodded. Everything was fine. If Anne-Marie worked at the treatment center, they would be able to see each other often. There should only be advantages from this. The novel said that Blunt moved into a dilapidated house, but something didn't add up. The place where the girl and her sister settled couldn't be called terrible. It was beautiful. The blonde almost always couldn't leave Yuri alone. The green-eyed one suggested having dinner together. She and Hestia usually eat late, so they made it just in time. The woman said that she had already eaten. It was clear that her interlocutor was a little upset, but smiling, she said that she was glad a crash was heard. Something broke, so the blonde should leave. The beauty turned and quickly moved on. She didn't know what would happen to the main villain. If he came to the wrong house in the original Lakios, was lying in front of Anne-Marie's house, Yuri decided to follow only the original plot from now on. Blunt shouldn't have known the truth, and shouldn't have blamed, because there wasn't even a mention of the lady in the book. The girl had already sent the web when Blunt returned. The girl handed over a whole plate of freshly baked cookies. She and Hestia had baked them together. The brunette often treated the little girl to something delicious. Once again, the lady began to realize how much her new neighbor resembled Coco. Deciding not to fight her feelings, Yuri promised that she would definitely eat everything, which made Blunt even happier. The girl decided to make a real remark. She noted that one shouldn't go outside when it's already late. The area is unsafe, and therefore one should be extremely careful. Anna-Marie didn't seem to notice the problem. The sound of her footsteps was very similar to Yuri's. The heroine tried to explain as clearly as possible that someone could imitate her gait, and then there would be problems. The beauty didn't know that such a person existed in the world, but he was not far away on the road. The heroine nevertheless promised to be more careful and left. The brunette realized that, as soon as Carnomel appeared in front of the main character's house, a real thriller would begin. It was hard to believe that Lakios was so addicted to the lady. He wanted to remove all the people around the maiden, kidnap her, and keep her near him, so that no one would dare look at her again. In the end, the young man even planned to kill Hestia so that she would not get under his feet, but the girl realized that she could not leave everything as it was, since the resulting commotion helped her escape from the laboratory. There was nothing left to do but follow her desires. The lady would be the one to throw out the main villain. First, she brought him into the house and noticed that the wounds had become larger, perhaps because she hit him. The man remained unconscious. His shirt was covered in bright red stains. Judging by the wounds, the attacker was aiming for fatal places. With such damage, even Blunt's power would hardly have helped, although the lady was not a product of the laboratory's experiments, but she, like her neighbor, has the power of fragments. Having appeared in the central part of the continent, the substance broke into fragments that flew in different directions and seeped into the people. Of course, problems arose that were not so easy to get rid of. Many died, precisely because of the side effects, which caused doubts. Anna Marie was rather lucky. Instead of dying, she received healing powers. These abilities were similar to those that came from the relics. Miss Yuri also didn't have much of a choice. In the laboratory, she was forcibly given a power she didn't want. Unfortunately, things weren't so simple in her life later. Blunt's healing abilities, which had awakened on their own, were different from the heroine's, which is why Lakios became even more attached to her. The woman tore the young man's shirt with a web and noticed the wounds being the main villain. The man most likely would not fall in love with the lady for trying to help him. After the girl carried out the disinfection, she began the operation and carefully stitched up all the wounds on the body. The girl did not have any medicine, but she planned to take it from her friend. The lady decided to leave. Lakios was still lying unconscious when an annoying voice started ringing in his head, ordering him to get up. Yuri had been in the coffee shop since early morning. The boss asked the girl to go to the table because someone had ordered lemonade. As expected, the man had not returned to the east. In the novel, wealthy aristocrats divided the country into eastern, western, southern, and northern parts to govern it. For them, this was simpler and more understandable. The heroine lived in the east, which is under the control of the family of Carlion Crockford. The main character, the girl, was worried that she might meet him, but in the end, she chose the comforts of civilization. Another rich man from the east is a minor character. Being an outstanding alchemist, he developed various convenient devices for people. Electricity was invented to replace candles, as well as a food heater, similar to a gas stove, and a freezer, which now allowed food to be stored in the cold. All devices could only have been invented by Eastern alchemists. The East is small, and exporting products from there was strictly prohibited. Yuri didn't understand how to resolve everything, and she was so immersed in her thoughts that she completely forgot that she was at work. The head of the coffee shop approached the girl and brought her out of her thoughts. She must be tired thanks to her. There were more customers. They could hire another worker to make things a little easier. The girl smiled radiantly, assuring that she was fine. In fact, she just hadn't slept enough and would like to get more sleep. She couldn't say that the villain was the cause. Anne-Marie came into the coffee shop. The brunette invited her to sit at a table and have a cup of coffee with her. She was just about to take a rest while there were no customers. The blonde waited until the coffee was ready and then handed over the bag. Inside was what she had been asked for in the morning, most likely the necessary medications. The heroine thanked her. She was planning to come by after work, but in the end, everything turned out this way. Blunt didn't ask her for money. After taking a sip from the mug, the girl thanked her for the delicious drink. The green-eyed girl suddenly announced that she was going to leave early. She asked to keep her company. The brunette thought for a moment, although she already knew what the answer would be. Yuri said that she had a meeting planned, so most likely nothing would work out between them. The heroine nodded her head, hanging sadly, but they promised to spend time with her next time. The woman was left alone when a piece of paper fell into her hands. It seemed like a new task had appeared. When evening came, the heroine went out. Usually during the day, she was in a coffee shop, but with the onset of night, she went on errands for the dark world. Having made her way to the place, the lady looked around carefully. She went down, and in a second wrapped 2 guards in a cocoon made of her web. The brunette didn't want such powers, but since they were given to her anyway, she had no intention of bearing them under any circumstances. The beauty spends them for good, so that she can ultimately live in peace. When the heroine went down to the lower lot, people noticing her began to panic and shout, asking who she was. The woman did not want to listen to them, but simply got to work. Just 10 minutes later, the lady sat and wondered why Anne-Marie looked so much like Coco, the dog. She wanted to know why the lady had moved to another place. The heroine approached one of the captives, asking how much Blunt's new house cost. The man was unable to answer, as his mouth was also gagged. Yuri always regretted that she couldn't live a calm and quiet life. Now it was time to finish the job. If the guards hadn't been so unruly, everything would have ended differently. The woman was about to cut her web, allowing the bound victims to fall. She mockingly reassured them, assuring them that since the height was only 10 meters, no one would be hurt. Some young man said that the documents were under the stairs. The heroine at the last moment grabbed his body and carefully lowered him to the ground, still without untying him. She left. She did not want to go back home. Lakios infuriated the heroine. Whether with her eyes open or closed, the brunette thought that she should have left him to die on the street, but in any case, she had no choice. The girl came back. There was no choice. She bent down to check on Lakios and was about to leave when he grabbed her hand and opened her eyes. She became scared. He shouldn't have woken up so early. The blonde remembered what happened before he fainted. He was dragging himself through the streets, barely breathing. He was tired and wanted to lie down and rest, while the voice in his head forced him to wake up and move on. The blue-eyed man looked at her with a dark gaze, and then the heroine realized that he was still not in his right mind. His eyes reflexively opened, but nothing more. The brunette asked him to lie down and sleep a little more. The man was not in any danger. He needed to rest a little more. The beauty carefully laid him back down, making him calm down a little. There was a bruise on his arm, but he still clung on tightly. The character, due to his activity, accidentally caused all the wounds that the lady was trying to heal to reopen. In the morning, the girl was completely tired. She could neither sleep nor breathe due to the threat to her life. Finally, the young man woke up. The lady standing near the window turned to ask how the man was feeling. His eyes lit up with a strange feeling. The brunette noticed that the atmosphere in the room had suddenly changed dramatically. Yuri decided to ignore it, and instead asked her not to move too much so that the wounds wouldn't reopen. The blonde wanted to say something, but instead he started coughing heavily. The hero probably didn't remember, but the day before, he fell unconscious in front of the beauty's house. The man looked like he had let his guard down. He continued to stare at the heroine. She couldn't stand it and asked what happened. She had to go to work before leaving. She explained that everything she needed was on the table, and if anything happened, she could go back to sleep. The woman really wanted the hero to disappear, but she understood that this was impossible for now. As soon as silence fell, the blue-eyed man began to wonder what kind of housewife would leaving a stranger in her house. The beauty was either heartless or good-natured, Lakios thought, and then again, the same voice was heard that could not believe that the man was alive. The young man did not understand why he was shouting so loudly. The voice even made his ears ring, which made him feel disgusted. The stranger began to shout even louder, not understanding how such a thing could be said to someone who cared. The spirit began to resent it when they noticed that he was not even human. Anyone in his place would have thought that the master was really finished judging by what happened. Blue Eyes should be careful. What is inside will die with him. He was just lucky, but next time everything could be worse. The hero does not believe in such a thing, because the one he trusted the most stabbed him in the back. The spirit again reminds him of the fact that he had repeatedly warned him about the possible risks, but not wanting to listen to anything else, Lakios agreed, and turned to the wall. He still needed a little more rest. The blonde should have known that the man would gain power. He thought that he had completely destroyed the laboratory. With all the people there, he needed to ask for help from what was inside him. Darkness decided to change the subject to continue to get on his nerves. He noticed that the gentleman seemed to be fascinated by that woman. His heart was beating like crazy, as if she was his ideal. The hero could have denied it, but he was almost ruined by the words that were said so inopportunely. Yuri was heading to work at that time. She noticed that someone had been trailing behind her since the moment she left the house. The man pretended he had nothing to do with it, but still stopped when the heroine stopped. The girl used her cunning and led the stranger into a dead end. He couldn't believe that everything ended like this. The lady came up from behind and wrapped the young man in a cocoon in a split second. She said that she would return later, because due to the difficult day, she did not need to stay and control everything in the smallest details. The girl remembered how everything happened in the novel. When Anne-Marie found Lakios at her house, she brought him inside. He woke up and she introduced herself, asking what her patient's name was. Instead of showing even a modicum of friendliness, the man grabbed the woman's hand and slapped it away, an evil light burning in his eyes that did not bode well. The heroine could not expect that after applying one bandage, she would make him be favorable to her. The girl seemed to want to become the guy's savior, but he really didn't like this scenario. He grabbed the lady by the throat and ordered her not to bother him. Even in a terrible state, it would not have been difficult for him to erase her from the world. Yuri understood that the whole plot had completely changed. Now the same man was lying on her couch covered in blood. You couldn't tell from him that he was the Lord of Darkness. He came on his own, but now he couldn't even get up. The hero began to toss and turn. Apparently, he had had an unpleasant dream, or his fever had returned. The lady gently placed her palm on his forehead and noticed that his condition had improved slightly, but not completely. Having pulled off her clothes a little, Arachne was surprised at how quickly the wounds on her body were healing. In 2 days, the condition had improved. Perhaps he couldn't be classified as an ordinary person, after all he was a villain. The girl assumed that Lachios also possessed the power of the moon fragment. There was no mention of this in the book, but if you think about it, it doesn't seem like a man could single-handedly destroy an entire laboratory. The lady thought, it seems that changes have taken place in the country. There was no guarantee that all the circumstances would happen exactly as in the novel, and of course, everything changed. The only thing the heroine didn't understand was how the matter related to her. The lady had brought men's clothing from work, but she began to doubt that it would suit her uninvited guest. Although the hero survived but lost a fair amount of blood, the brunette would have liked to receive at least some kind of reward for nursing him back to health, but given the entire situation, it didn't look like she had any prospects. In the middle of the night, the young man finally woke up, and through the pain, he sat up in bed and froze, because next to him lay a lady who had fallen asleep. While sitting on a chair, her hand gently reached out to her head to touch it. The girl felt someone touching her hair, and almost immediately jumped up. Their palms collided, because she wanted to push him away from herself. Something inside her turned over, touching the man's fingers. An inexplicable feeling came. Tears started flowing from her eyes, and this made her even more surprised. All feelings had been erased in the laboratory, but it seemed that something had changed. For the first time in a long time, the girl felt warmth and joy that had not been with her before. The blonde was also surprised. He quickly realized that he was not able to control himself. He did not want to endure the strange sensations any longer, so he quickly wanted to pull his hand away and leave. The girl realized that now that very small grain would be taken away again, and so she grabbed hold of his wrist with force. The blue-eyed man tried to say something, but they didn't let him go. This persistence was disconcerting. Since even then the heroine did not let go of the wrist, a chain reaction began. The girl accidentally fell onto the man, who again ended up on the bed. The glass standing on the table broke, and water spilled onto the floor. The woman realized the situation she was in, which only made her even more embarrassed. Last night, while taking care of Lachios, she accidentally fell asleep, although she didn't think it was possible. Then she felt someone touching her hair and woke up. Somehow it happened that now the two were lying next to each other. Despite the absurdity of the situation, the lady really did not want to let go of Carnamale, as if something was pulling her body straight towards him. The young man blushed. He cleared his throat, but his voice was still very quiet. The guy remarked that it would be great if the lady let go of his hand. After these words, the heroine jumped back almost immediately. She immediately apologized, hoping that she would be forgiven for her small mistake. Her face became stony again. As soon as the physical contact was interrupted, all feelings disappeared, just as they had been before. The strange phenomenon made her doubt, but the maiden still couldn't figure out the details. She apologized again, saying that she had acted tactlessly in her sleep. It was unintentional, and Avalon must have been upset. The hero shook his head quickly, went to look for something, and after a few seconds, having found a pen and notebook lying on the table, he began to actively write something. Carnimal himself asked for forgiveness, because he himself had behaved tactlessly. The brunette smiled warmly. The neighbors should still try to help, even though the blonde wasn't her friend, since he ended up nearby by complete accident. The words spoken seemed to send him into euphoria again. The blue-eyed man began to write something with even greater zeal. He had some thoughts that the lady did not yet fully know about. The young man showed the paper. He understood that he had not yet fully recovered, so he asked to stay for a few more days. The lady could not refuse, considering how she was asked about it. The girl also had her own opportunity when she touched the hand. A strange phenomenon occurred. She needed to figure everything out, getting up. She nodded. In this state, it would be nice to rest a little more. At first, Lachios didn't believe that Yuri had agreed so easily, but he couldn't ask the question. The woman was about to leave when someone grabbed her by the sleeve. It seemed that the man had finally revealed his true nature. But no, the piece of paper read, "I want to know the name of such a noble man." The girl answered the question. and was told that the name was very suitable. The young man looked surprisingly pleased, and then wrote his name too. There was nothing left to do but to return the compliment. As soon as the door closed, something happened inside. Worm was probably to blame for what happened. He probably used the ability of the fragments, although the master said that it cannot be used on others. Darkness immediately began to make excuses. He did not try to change anything, and agreed that the moment when the lady touched his hand was strange. The girl was most likely not ordinary. For some reason, the blonde remembered his past. When he was on the street with Zena's Sheldon, he mocked him, admitting that for a person like him, that time everything turned out much better than expected. He remembered the hero's name, but not for long. It was better for him to wallow in the mud, because even greater blows were inflicted on his body. Again, the red-haired man could barely breathe, but asked Carnomale not to touch Anne-Marie and Hestia. Before finishing everything, the blonde chuckled. He did everything to make sure the girls were comfortable, but it was this man who stole them, jumping up on the bed. Yuri began to try to breathe. It was just a nightmare, but a very realistic one. The heroine dreamed of her beloved Zene's Sheldon, but she remembered the details very poorly. Yet there was a strange feeling inside her that made her shrink. The lady realized that it was already morning, so she opened the curtains with a slight movement. The brunette didn't intend to think about what had happened, deciding to write it all off as some stupid dream. Entering the blonde's room, she decided to open the curtains, and sunlight there always has a positive effect on one's well-being. Just as she was about to finish what she had started, the beauty froze. A man who had already woken up was sitting on the sofa. He turned to the lady, and she thought that it seemed that, because of what had happened, he had seen everything. Trying to calm the jumping voice, the lady turned to Lakios and quietly asked why he was not sleeping anymore. She inquired about his health, but in response, she received only silence. The young man was so quiet that the lady forgot about his existence for a moment. Approaching the window, the woman continued. If the guy didn't mind, she could open the curtains. Maybe the hero wasn't fully awake yet, but it was time for Yuri to get ready for work. The blonde wrote on the sheet of paper that he was fine. His face also remained sad. Inside, the lady hoped that since there was no reaction, the trick with the web performed earlier had probably not been noticed. The room was dark, so the girl used her powers just a little. In any case, she realized that it was worth at least a little while to refrain from using her powers at home so as not to be noticed. The worm started calling Lakios to notice something interesting. Instead of listening, the young man lowered his head into his hands. The girl was in her pajamas, and this embarrassed him even more. Such a reaction made the inner darkness angry. The hero again had that same strange feeling that he had before. He definitely saw something sparkling that was shining from the girl's hand. When she entered the room, he doesn't understand what exactly it was. Yuri came into the room again, already completely collected. The lady brought plates of food. She made something other than bread because she thought it would be difficult for the victim to eat. When the plate appeared on the table, Carnomal froze and made a face. He didn't like the contents, but the brunette remained calm, declaring that stewed meat with seafood was quite healthy. The darkness inside Lakios screamed again, not understanding if the man was really going to eat something that looked so suspicious. He knew that the owner would not die, even if he drank poison, but he still continued to scream. The blonde carefully took the spoon and put some food in his mouth. He couldn't speak, and it was clear from his face that he obviously didn't like it. He wanted to immediately spit out everything that was in his cheeks. Smiling, the lady advised them to finish their meal as quickly as possible. She was about to leave for work, so she did not stay nearby to supervise. Lakios had no choice. He didn't want to upset the woman, so he behaved exactly like that. Half an hour later, he finished everything he had. His stomach started to hurt, and he realized that he needed to take his medicine quickly. The young man dragged himself to the kitchen. He needed to find something for digestion. For some reason, the room was empty. Almost all the cupboards were not filled with anything except a few loaves of bread and salt. Finally, the hero thought that he would find something in the closet. There were strange dolls with various clothes on them. The darkness, just like the owner, was scared because such a sweet lady could not possess something so strange. While at work, Yuri thought about what had happened that morning. She couldn't remember if she had oversalted the meat, and she tried to find a reason why the guy might not have liked the dish she had prepared. The brunette went outside and looked around. She remembered the man who had followed her in the evening. She should go and find out from him who had hired him to put on such a show. When the girl arrived at the scene, she looked around, and it became clear that the man was dead. There was blood around the cocoon. Apparently, the person who sent him found the poor guy before he could blurt out anything. The girl examined the body one last time and began to understand that everything was not just like that. There were familiar wounds on the body, vital organs were again affected. Only one person could have done this, and the heroine would teach him a proper lesson. Yuri went to work. The dream last night had seriously disturbed her, or rather brought her back to reality. She shouldn't forget what kind of person was in her house. At one of the tables sat a lady's acquaintance named Snow. He, as usual, began to chat, because this activity was perhaps his only entertainment. The weather was sunny outside. Instead of stating his order, the man handed over a sunflower with a broken stem. The woman yelled at him because she was fed up, and instead, she again insistently asked him to name everything he wanted to buy. The girl said that she doesn't accept gifts. It's not her style at all. The young man wanted to keep the flower for himself, but he took it and broke, which made me a little doubt. He just wanted to show it, nothing more. Yuri herself knew what a regular guest would want to order. The man assumed that the girl was interested in him, since she had known in advance. The beauty sighed with displeasure and left. Even if it was true, the hero always came to the cafe. The long hair did not show anything unusual, but the purple eyes very much meant that he was the protector of the eastern part of the country. Xenos's favorite character, Sheldon, also had the same eye color. He was a supporting character who met all the beauty standards. Every time Anna Marie needed help, he would appear out of nowhere like a ghost and become her support. Sometimes the man was friendly, sometimes playful, and sometimes angry. The brunette sitting in the cafe did not look like him at all. There is no doubt that Xenos was written out of the novel for some reason. Before meeting Blunt, the young man lived hiding his appearance and name. For some time, the brunette followed the guy, but he turned out to be an ordinary slacker. That day, he again thanked her for the coffee paid and was about to leave. Anna Marie arrived at the cafe, smiling radiantly as usual. The hero walked past the girl on his way out, as if she were nothing. If he were Sheldon, he might have reacted somehow. Smiling back at her friend, the lady asked what had happened. It turned out that she had come briefly to say something, but the conversation was interrupted by a scream coming from the street. A bird defecated on Snow's head. The coffee shop owner noticed that this was not the first time this had happened. He went out to hand him a napkin. The man screaming because of the bird poop could not be Xenos. This is further confirmation. Yuri decided to leave him alone and turned to Blunt again. The green-eyed woman had recently overheard a conversation about the treatment center. She works there, and therefore was aware of some details that had already been taken outside the hospital. People started disappearing in the town across from the bridge. In the shelter on Red Pirate Street, children were disappearing. The red-eyed one froze. She began to understand what was happening, and it couldn't help but frighten her. Such an event also symbolized the beginning of a romance. It was a kind of warning, and the lady remembered everything in detail. After the conversation, when the shift at the cafe ended, the lady went to the cemetery. There was no one around. When she started calling Leo, she shouted that if he came out, she would never swear. A second later, a wolf appeared, turning into a half-human, and rushing to hug the lady, smiling. The heroine noted that he was not really angry, but this did not change the fact that he had done wrong. The girl calmly explained that it is impossible to catch and eat everyone who's chasing the lady. Eating dirty things will cause indigestion, and it is impossible to eat the same thing the lady asks. To think about this next time. If this happens, she will be angry. The guy asked for forgiveness, and sadly turned away. He still does not understand that in another impulse, he will not be able to defeat the beast within himself. He needs to be more careful for his own future good, otherwise it will be bad. Leo is a victim of an experiment. He was with Arachne in the lab. The first experiment was conducted on him at the age of 13, and then his growth stopped. If the experiment is unsuccessful, animal instincts begin to prevail over reason. Such mistakes of scientists happened often. The boy is one of the mistakes, which means he may have problems. The girl turned to the guy again, asking if he came alone. Of course, she knew in advance what was going on. A voice was heard, and then feathers appeared around and fell down. A half-man, half-raven came down, and smiling greeted the lady whom he had not seen for quite a long time. She was always busy. The man asked how long it had been since they had contacted him. Apparently, the woman was not taking any breaks from work, which was noticeable, because she was taking breaks every time not being with her friends, but wasted time at work. Arachne calmly said that she needed to tell something. The hero immediately lit up with joy and asked to be told. Perhaps he was expecting something interesting, but in the end, the lady's expression did not bode well. Red-Eyed asked to look into the situation in Karnamala, all because of rumors about the king of the dark world who died. Due to illness, his son killed all his rivals and took the throne. The brunette raised an eyebrow incomprehensibly. It seemed like something from a novel, but the girl was hearing about it for the first time in her current life. The girl nodded and said that she had recently been stalked by a guy as well. Most likely a person from the dark world was involved in the statue. Things could get complicated by Leo's death. The raven nodded. He knew that it would be easy to carry out what he had planned. He just had to try. The brunette was showing off as usual. He liked that kind of thing. The man turned to the wolf cub. The young man did it again, so he was even thrown out of the lab. The brunette began to growl. He does not like this kind of treatment. The raven turned to the young man again. It is better to use human words instead of growling. Arachne raised her voice. She had already told Odin that one should not be rude to those who are in the same place and on the same team with him. Having apologized, the hero began to ask what they should do next. The lady was not going to stay. She did not have much time left. Yuri would repay as usual, only a little later. One of them abruptly stopped the girl and asked where she was going, so quickly. Arachne decided to joke, saying that she had gotten a cat. The guys immediately froze and started shouting, asking how she could betray them. Somehow, the woman decided to take responsibility. Turning around, the lady asked him to stop shitting on the guests of her coffee shop. She knew that it was he who always sat on the roof in the form of a crow. When Arachne left the cemetery, Odin turned to Leo. He didn't know if the cat the lady was talking about was a real pet or something else, and she was just joking. Obviously, the wolf cub thinks that this is not true. The young man exhaled. It seems that the raven will never reach the star. For some reason, the woman likes small animals. He teased again, noticing that it was hard to tolerate Leo. The wolf cub thought that the house cat needed to be caught. He was already in a more serious mood, but then the words of the lady came into his head, who said that next time she would be even angrier. Yuri returned home. This long day should have already come to an end. Lakios met the lady on the sofa with a piece of paper with the inscription, "Welcome back." No one had met her for a long time. It was even a little strange. Everything was fine with the body. Apparently the medications were working. After all, the lady bent over the table to take the plates. They were empty. This is a good sign, because then the young man liked the prepared meat stew. The blonde frowned, because due to the proximity, he could smell all the scents. The lady smelled like some kind of animal. It wasn't like the smell of a stray cat. It was something more that made him very embarrassed. The heroine noticed that someone was looking at her intently. Turning around, the heroine smiled. The brunette asked to say if she suddenly needed anything, she wouldn't have to get up again. After all, her body hadn't recovered yet. Lakios turned away, his face flushed with embarrassment, as the beast inside him began to whisper, suggesting that they pretend to need help. They could use the power of the relic to learn the essence of this woman. The blue-eyed man took up the paper again. He needed to change his clothes, so he asked for help. That would be nice. The lady froze. She didn't have time to answer anything, as the hero again began to actively write something. In his opinion, if things get difficult, you can always refuse. The woman screamed that she wouldn't refuse. She grabbed his shirt and started unbuttoning it. She needed help, but the motive behind it was unclear. When the lady took action, she did it aggressively. She could not miss her chance. Then, when the hands touched, the maiden felt a strange feeling. She wanted to understand why it arose, and she understood that the best moment might not present itself. Lakios was wounded, and while she had the opportunity, she would not be asked questions. The beauty began to unbutton her shirt, but her thoughts were occupied with something completely different. She did not know how to take his hand again. Again, the opportunity presented itself. The young man tried to stop Yuri and accidentally grabbed her wrist. Her face lit up. The same feeling that made her freeze appeared a second later. It was almost all over. The blonde asked him to unbutton the buttons himself. The brunette didn't want to refuse. She didn't know how else she could do it. The beauty continued to undress the man and stumbled right onto his chest. Lakios began to feel the anger that usually arose around enemies again. The woman could not restrain herself and blurted out something about accidentally missing the target. A picture appeared in my head of what Carnival would do as soon as he came to his senses. The man was considered a villain, so the beauty would most likely be killed. Arachne said that she had a headache, and with these words, she fell onto the man's chest. She had been feeling dizzy a lot lately, most likely due to the fatigue that had accumulated inside her. She needed to rest. The beast inside Avalon began to whisper quietly, asking if he could take a chance. The blue-eyed one gently touched his forehead. to check the temperature. Perhaps it was because of him that he passed on the disease. The girl nodded, but said that she would be fine. She would rest a little, and then everything would be fine. Warmth appeared inside her body again. It was as if Yuri had regained something she had lost long ago. She did not understand how she lived without these feelings. When Lakios thought that something strange had taken hold, the voice of that beast was heard again. He again asked to reveal the essence of the woman, using the power of the relic. They usually acted according to exactly this scheme when they needed to find out something. Tears began to flow from the heroine's eyes. Yuri pulled away and carefully wiped her face, not understanding why this feeling had appeared again. Lakios was angry at the worm, thinking that it was because of him that he had behaved strangely with his mistress. The brunette stood up and was about to leave. She needed to bring the man a change of clothes. Looking at her, the hero blushed again. They definitely had some kind of spark. The worm started whispering again. That girl definitely had a rather abnormal reaction. He needed to check. The blue-eyed man knew that the young man had no conscience. Yuri fed him and nursed him back to health, and she couldn't be treated inhumanely. The hero is lying. The rapid heartbeat explains everything. When the girl comes back, it is worth touching her again. This way the darkness will be able to find out everything itself. The inner voice continued to make adjustments. This time the situation did not drag on, but Lakios can still show his former inner charm. Seduce a woman and attract her with his body will not be difficult. Blue Eyes choked on his drink. He was still against such a strategy in order to hold his partner back. A little, Avalon suggested finding a relic. With its help, he could destroy the darkness so that it would no longer buzz in his ears. Yuri was still pondering over what had happened. It completely occupied her thoughts. The strange feeling was not an illusion. The novel was also a theory from Anne-Marie's perspective. Lakios was not discussed in detail. It was simply mentioned that he was a villain. The lady could have missed something by accident. The man could be the owner of the powers of the fragments. Changes could have occurred in the country. Perhaps not everything is going exactly the same as in the book that the heroine read earlier. One was watching from the sidelines. A meeting was taking place on the street. The master was surprised that they had not managed to catch the man who was on the verge of death. His subordinate fell to his knees, asking for forgiveness. He needed another chance. Since the man was magnanimous, he promised to give him another 10 days to work. The blue-eyed man ordered the fake to be brought to him and smiled, knowing what he would do to him as soon as the opportunity for reprisal presented itself. The lady went to the city. She couldn't stop thinking the feelings that appeared. When Lakios touched her, something appeared, and it couldn't be called an illusion. Someone called Yuri by name. Turning around, the lady met Anne-Marie's gaze. Blunt ran up and, bowing, greeted again. They had not seen each other for some time due to work. Smiling, the blonde asked if the lady was going to the cafe. They could go together. An obsessive thought appeared in her head. Perhaps she would have a strange feeling inside if she and Anne-Marie held hands just like then with Lakios. The blonde was delighted with the opportunity and happily clung to the hand. Nothing happened. It was predictable, and this means that such a phenomenon only occurs between Yuri and Carnomal. The girls went ahead along the road straight to the coffee shop. Blunt, without thinking twice, suggested going with her to the spring festival on the weekend. The brunette completely forgot that this event was coming up very soon. There would be fireworks tonight. The green-eyed girl noted that since her friend had lived in the city for a long time, she probably knew about this and had never seen such a beautiful moment. Yuri shook her head. Although the woman knows about the festival, she has never been there. During her time of origin, the girl lived and worked under the name Arachne. This event is the largest in the East. During the festival, underground auctions are held. One of Yuri's regular customers gave the girl the task of buying the goods ahead of schedule every year as a trusted person. Blunt brought the girl back from her thoughts to reality. It would be a spring day off. Hestia really wanted to go, so she needed company. The girl knew that she would most likely be given another task, so she mentioned her busy schedule. The blonde sadly lowered her head and again looked like Coco. In the first episode, the main character is closely connected to the case of missing orphans. There was no mention of the festival. The girl could not stop thinking about the case when her friend was persecuted during the autumn harvest. In any case, nothing terrible should happen because that madman is not there. Only Lakios is in the city. Not wanting something terrible to happen during the festival, Yuri promised that if she gets free earlier, she will come and keep them company. Her friend's eyes immediately began to shine with joy. Again she asked to discuss the time and place of the meeting. Yuri was not against the lady feeling good. Turning around, the lady suggested meeting near the clock tower. Blunt shook her head. It might be too crowded there. If they separated, it would be difficult to find each other. She suggested finding a quieter place. Yuri said that nothing terrible would happen. She would find Anna Marie wherever she was. The words seemed supernatural to the lady. She blushed with joy and surprise. The green-eyed girl quickly agreed to meet near the tower. The girl promised that she would come around 9 o'clock. They had to be together, so Arachne could protect her friend from what could theoretically happen. Before leaving, the blonde wished the lady a good day. She immediately shook her hand. After that one time, she really loved handshakes. Lakio stood by the window and peered out from behind the curtain Yuri left, and it became obvious that the man was about to leave. The darkness inside was indignant. His body had not yet fully recovered, and if he made any unnecessary movements, it would only get worse. Carnimal got ready, and after he took off the bandages and put on his cloak, he couldn't sit idly by after all. Before leaving, he should take some medicine to improve digestion. The blue-eyed man asked him to shut up because he immediately began to feel nauseous. They ate a lot of what looked like garbage, because in the morning, Yuri again prepared the same food as before. Lakios shook his head. The lady cooked with soul, so he could not refuse, it could offend. As soon as the medicine entered his system, he felt a little better. The storm in his stomach subsided. The last time the beast felt such a taste was in the grave, and he was glad that this would not happen again, unless the man once again decided to agree to food. Hearing the familiar name, the blonde squeezed the bottle tightly in her hand. The man bent over, a mad light lit up in his eyes. An inner voice probably doesn't even know why that place was given the name grave. Usually, no one comes out of there alive. Such are the conditions the hero was abandoned there by the man called Father. Lakios became a test subject, and thanks to this, he got a noisy parasite who now gets into where it is necessary and where it is not necessary with his stupid advice. The boy's father lived happily until he came face to face with his little one. He was incredibly scared when he saw that his son had escaped from that place safe and sound. It was extremely difficult to believe what had happened. The man's fear was well-founded. No one had ever escaped from the laboratory, and the first person to do so was 5-year-old Lakios, who killed everyone who had put him there, including his father. The young man returned from his memories to reality. He smiled lightly after all. In order to get rid of unpleasant memories, he needs to destroy everything that reminds him of what happened. He has already figured out what he will do. The man suggested they leave. They still had a mission to leave one last gift for that traitor. Before leaving, the young man looked into the cafe and watched from the roof as Yuri rushed between the tables, delivering orders. After some time, it became clear that the hero was still having difficulty moving. Darkness was angry, not understanding why he had gone somewhere. The blue-eyed man could have returned home at any time, but he decided to first check how his mistress was doing. About 40 minutes had passed since the young man left the temporary residence. While Yuri walked back and forth, he only looked at her black hair. For some reason, Lakios was unable to keep track of time. There were still some strange people around. They were constantly talking to the girl, which noticeably worsened the mood. Many of them offered to go together to the festival, which was supposed to take place very soon. One of the cafe's patrons was particularly suspicious. For some reason, he seemed familiar to Carnimal, but he couldn't remember who this person was. The young man took aim at the lady, noticing that she was quite popular. She had probably already found company. For some reason, Snow thought that the woman was not interested in noisy events, that it was not at all for people who like to have fun. The hero wanted to go with the brunette he spoke, but for some reason fell silent and abruptly bent over, clutching his face with his hand. Nothing happened. The guy was too dramatic, saying that the beauty was sparkling too much. After paying for his food, the young man left the coffee shop and tried to catch his breath. Then he really felt bad, but he couldn't say anything. The face of an alchemist appeared in the hall. When the visitor looked at the lady for some reason, he momentarily remembered Damon's Salvator. Of course, it was not a very pleasant memory. The vision definitely showed that man. It was hard to believe that the girl was going to the festival with him. Snow didn't think that he would be uncomfortable thinking about it, but for some reason his thoughts weren't occupied with anything else. The heroine had never been interested in festivals, but suddenly changed her mind, and the brunette decided to go there too, to check everything out and find out if his guesses were correct. Lakios was still standing on the roof and watched as the figure of the man walked away down the street. The darkness did not understand why the gentleman made such a fuss about the festival. He should have left long ago. and not waste his precious time. Blue-eyed hoped that Yuri had an appointment with someone other than one of those guys in the coffee shop. He was going to look for some kind of sign. Finally moving forward, he jumped over, but as soon as he landed on the roof of the house, he felt a piercing pain in his stomach. The man waved his friend off and said that it was okay. He came to a certain place to find a sign left by people from the dark world. Many of them have a habit of leaving signs in related places that are the complete opposite of their habitat. Usually, there are about 20 or 30 of them, but now Lakios hasn't noticed a single one. He needs specific information from the dark world. He is looking for the one called the Black Raven and named Odin. Carnimal heard a sound behind him, and in a split second, he turned around, grabbing the crow. When he looked into his hand, he realized that there was nothing left there. It became clear that the Blackie was not a simple bird like all the others. Blondie thought that a feather or something like that would be a sign of the arrival of people from the dark world, but instead, he met a whole raven, and he realized that he could begin the task as soon as possible. One returned back to the place where he was temporarily located. For him, the mission was a failure, because some guy grabbed him and almost forced him to stay. He does not understand who dared to treat his favorites so unceremoniously. The killer's hand movements were precise and quick. The raven didn't see a single strand of hair, let alone a face. Perhaps that person was a newcomer who has been fearlessly approaching the information site lately. The hero's suspicions were aroused by one of the bird's reports, and he realized that the best option was to check everything himself. The brunette was about to leave, but he remembered Arachne's request. He would have to go to Carnomale and see everything with his own eyes. The decision was made to sort this out as quickly as possible and then return to the stranger. Lakios returned home and lay on his bed, staring at the ceiling. Yuri returned and started asking from the doorway, asking how he was feeling and whether he needed to cook dinner. The blonde remembered the food he had eaten before and froze in horror. The girl put a bag of bread that was left in the coffee shop on the table and turned to go to the kitchen. If the food that was delivered to the house wasn't enough, then she could start cooking, but for now this was already considered something. The girl noticed almost immediately that all the bottles of digestive medicine were gone. The woman exhaled. She was almost disappointed. If a guest didn't like her food, he could say so directly. The brunette looked around, just in case she had pasted cobwebs on all the windows and doors, but on one window it was slightly torn immediately, arousing unasked questions about what Lakios was doing outside. The man sat near the table, motionless, and waited for what would happen next. He looked like a large trained dog. The girl put a tray on the table, on which there was bread and a drink. The guy's face immediately lit up with joy. The young man was about to start eating, but before doing so, he handed the food to the lady and asked if she would have any. His face turned red. Both Anna-Marie and Lakios seemed to be created to melt people's hearts. They really do it very well. The brunette decided to change the subject. She had plans on Saturday, so she said that she was going to come back late. The red-eyed woman noticed something. The man's facial expression changed for a moment. He seemed to become sad or more angry. She decided that she had just imagined it and was about to leave so as not to linger any longer. The young man was left alone and again remembered the moment when people pestered the girl in the cafe and asked her to spend time with them. It was hard to believe, but perhaps she would go to the festival with one of them. Yuri didn't go to the coffee shop. She had a meeting scheduled before that she met with Leo, who immediately growled happily. The guy happily reported that he managed to keep his promise. He didn't bother anyone. One had not yet returned, but a box with a mask and cape was left near the wall. The woman put on her uniform in a second and began to look like a man. The wolf was surprised, but the lady explained to him that a small task had come up. Yuri asked to make sure that no one approached the clothes. The boy nodded, but in return, asked for some melon candies. Almost immediately after Arachne left, the young man noticed something glowing in the distance. Of course he ran there. The girl arrived at the place where she was sent, and once again, amidst the hubbub of the festival, an auction opened. Not just anyone could enter due to its prestige. Usually, only the rich come there, and one can only enter with a special invitation. At the entrance, the lady was asked for identification. The woman nodded and handed over a gold card with an auction sign. The servant nodded and greeted her, and also offered to take her outerwear. The heroine handed over the cape and looked around. Her client was a wealthy grandfather. He wanted to get the rarest item ever put up for auction. Arachne was not rich and came for the task. She planned to remain unnoticed until the very end. The brunette dressed up as a man. All the ladies around gasped. As soon as they saw her screams were heard, the girl was distracted because this was much more interesting. Two of the guests ended up wearing the same mask, which caused them to yell at each other, and when the one who was the loudest was leaving, he accidentally bumped Arachne's shoulder, causing his mask to transfer slightly onto his face. The woman looked closely. Her hair was dark blue, but rather pale, as if it hadn't been dyed for a long time. Her eyes were dark black. The girl immediately understood who was in front of her. It was the alchemist, Salvator Damon. The guy walked on and again started shouting something to the young man standing next to him. He was shouting that even though everything had turned out this way, they needed to find another option. Yuri was distracted from his contemplation because he was called forward. The maiden walked into the hall where the auction was already beginning. The gentleman stepped forward and greeted everyone. The goods began to be brought out onto the stage one by one. The very first was an ancient royal sword, and then a necklace cursed by a legendary northern animal. The brunette sighed with displeasure. The items on display didn't look much like an auction for the rich. It was time for the last item. Last year, the girl had bought a love potion and thought something similar would happen again. The blonde finally began to shout, announcing what exactly would be presented. A real miracle created by a great alchemist, a legendary treasure capable of resurrecting a person, appeared before the guests. The woman froze in horror because in front of her was the sage's stone. The starting price of the thing was 1,000,000,000 gold. The people in the hall began to make noise. Not everyone wanted to believe they needed verification after listening to them. The girl also began to think that the thing on stage was a fake. It was unclear how a fragment of ruins ended up at the auction. Those gathered began shouting, asking for proof that the stone could resurrect a person. The blonde man was a little worried and began to say that if anyone didn't believe it, they could calmly leave. Only the best alchemists will be able to use the treasure. Those who do not have a tower are not recommended to participate. By tower, the presenter meant an alchemical one, a place where research is usually conducted. Naturally, the initial price is so high that most people will not be able to buy it. The words of the gentleman, in such a place, sound like a nasty grinding sound, wounding the pride of the great nobles. Someone jumped up and started shouting his price. Those sitting next to him immediately realized that it was Damon Salvator. In front of them, people immediately began to bargain as soon as they realized that such a respected person also wanted to get the thing. The alchemist shouted that this was not the sage's stone. Arachne exhaled in irritation. She had to intervene and stop the bidding as always, because this could not continue any longer. During the laboratory's existence, similar jokes were inserted into people's bodies countless times, including Yuri's. The stone cannot be given to a person who does not know its purpose. The girl considered herself a true thief, so she quickly grabbed the thing from the stage. With the help of a web, security immediately arrived, and the sound of many feet quickly approaching could be heard. The woman managed to hide behind one of the columns. Chaos ensued, and an order was given to block all exits. The girl would not be able to leave through the door, meaning she only had a window left, which she needed to use as quickly as possible. The girl carefully opened the window with the help of her web. The servants were shouting, asking not to let anyone out. Most of the visitors were noble aristocrats, so they were not easy to control, but eventually they would have to. They had no choice. While the screams were heard, the girl found herself on the roof, realizing that soon it would all be over. The woman exhaled and decided to move on. In any case, it didn't matter what would happen next, because of the mask, they would never recognize her. There was also something strange. The heroine felt as if she had hit something when she was flying. She hoped that it was just her imagination, nothing more. It turned out to be true, though. The man who remained in the hall felt like he had been hit on the head. He didn't understand what had happened. Yuri and Damon were supposed to meet, even though this was the only place Salvator could come. But a simple cafe employee would hardly be able to find an expensive invitation made of gold. The red-haired man missed a lot while he was on the sidelines. His thoughts were distracted by a cry that the sage's stone had been stolen. Damon, unable to control himself, screamed. He even took off his mask. The servant tried to calm him down, but in the man's opinion, nothing was as important as the thing he was going to get. The alchemist was distracted. The voice was menacing. He called the young man by name. It was time to calm down, a long time ago, and stop getting hysterical when something doesn't work out. The blue-eyed man almost immediately realized who was in front of him. It was Zeno Sheldon. He had arrived on business silence, hung in the room. The man turned and asked menacingly why the young man had come to the auction. He was clearly displeased with his outburst. For some reason, it seemed as if the rumors about the event were untrue, but noticing Xenos, the hero changed his mind. The status of what was happening was quite high, that was true. The interlocutor chuckled. He knew what he was about to say, causing doubt. The red-haired man didn't understand how the alchemist dared to even mention Xenos's level, considering he himself had created the terrible chaos that made people shout at each other and try to take the item they were selling. The blue-eyed man laughed, even when the conversation turned to personal matters. The man only did what he said. Nothing changed for him. Sheldon also threw off his mask and walked forward, stepping on it. The hero grinned and began to speak. He still found it funny to see a friend in a rage he really liked. This coming closer, the man took hold of the mask and tore it off the servant, who was next to the alchemist. They had identical masks in the form of frogs. The young man decided to finally reveal his true intentions. He needed to tell why he had come to the auction. It was all just to see how Damon would behave. No one knew that the thing that the gentleman wanted so much would be stolen after these words. The hero disappeared, leaving his interlocutor alone with his anger. The red-haired man, like everyone else, went to enjoy the festival, which was already in full swing. Lakios also went into the city. The darkness inside could not calm down. He was constantly hungry and pointed to various stands with delicious food. The blonde rudely refused they had just had lunch, so adding anything else to this would be wrong. The blue-eyed man took money from other people. Initially, he had nothing, but after pulling out some coins, he was able to eat. The man believes that, in fact, he should be thanked. In the end, he could have killed everyone, but instead, he only robbed, nevertheless deciding to buy something else. The young man took the ice cream and began to eat. The beast inside was finally happy, but was not going to shut up. For some reason, it initially seemed that food in the East was only for beggars. Apparently, that woman's culinary skills were terrible. Lakios claimed that he was not picky. Of course, his words more resembled a lie. The hero doubted before answering. In the end, they drank many vials for digestion, which helped cope with the stomach pains that arose due to the tasteless soup. The gentleman turned around and headed towards some alley. He didn't say why he needed to do this. He just went there silently. Something clicked in his head. He needed to find Yuri. He smiled like a mental patient, but insisted that he just wanted to find out who the lady was going to the festival. With his thoughts were so busy that at first the man even forgot that the girl was also going to the event. The young man didn't know what he was going to do with the man when he met him. He would probably just kill him. A man running past distracted him from the conversation. Arachne accidentally touched Lakios with her elbow and turned around when he declared some familiar feeling. His heart started beating faster, and it became scary to realize that most likely the hero realized who was under the mask. Anne-Marie and Hestia were already in the crowd in the square. The girl had bought something tasty. She was happy her sister suggested they quietly go to the clock tower to meet a friend. They were walking past the stalls when someone called Blunt by name. Almost immediately, she turned and waved to the friendly woman. The two met Mariel. They hadn't seen each other for quite some time. The little girl immediately bowed her head, which made the beauty smile. The girl turned out to be very polite. This was only pleasant. The lady did not come to the festival alone. Her companion went shopping, so she decided to wait near their meeting place. The brunette often couldn't stop talking once she started. Perhaps Anne-Marie didn't hear, but a bookstore called The Swan had opened on the next street. The woman wanted to continue chatting about that until she remembered Hestia. She gave the little girl some money so she could run off and buy herself something tasty at one of the shops in the main square. Anne-Marie heard that the girl wanted another lizard kebab, but she was warned that it would be better not to do this since she had already eaten 2 whole ones. Her friend asked her not to interfere, as children need to eat a lot to get enough nutrients. While her sister was talking to her friend, the girl had already taken another delicacy and thanked the seller. She turned to leave, but noticed a tail behind one of the boxes. Perhaps a dog was there. Leo was sitting there. He was carefully watching a lizard on a skewer. He really wanted to eat something so delicious, but he understood that he couldn't go out. Otherwise, people would notice the lady had made a promise, which meant the guy didn't plan to break it. Suddenly, someone handed him food, and after that, the head automatically turned off. The boy was about to run away, but he saw a blonde appear in front of him and greet him. He was distracted by food and didn't feel her presence. At this time, Yuri still couldn't leave the roof. She was standing in front of Carnival, who began to talk about a suspiciously familiar feeling. The man felt a disgusting energy that couldn't help but push him away. The woman felt uncomfortable. The hero's gaze burned right through her, making her cringe. It became clear without a doubt that the guy looked at her in exactly the same way behind her back when he was at home. Even if everything was so, the lady did not understand where her gratitude was. It would have been better that way. The blonde continued tearing her away from her thoughts. He ordered not to pretend that the stranger did not know what was being discussed. Everything was visible. The finger pointed at the cloak. The girl completely forgot about the shard she stole at the auction. Yuri never opened her mouth, and so the boy thought that he was being ignored. He could think whatever he wanted. The girl knew that she physically couldn't allow herself to speak, because then her voice would be recognized immediately. The brunette needed to hurry and leave, because the meeting with Anne-Marie was very close. The lady had one more task. She did not forget that she promised to buy Leo some melon candies, which he was really looking forward to. The blue-eyed man managed to get closer and spoke again. He saw how the girl was about to leave, but he could not allow this to happen. Since he was directly ignored, there was nothing left but to forcefully pull out the shard. The heroine skillfully dodged and ran away, leaving the man with nothing. She reproached herself for such carelessness. After all, in front of her was Avalon himself, who is known for his strength. The heroine forgot what he was really like, while the young man pretended to be calm and kind when he was at the stranger's house. Until this moment, the woman thought that everything was more or less normal, and she would be able to calmly complete her mission. But everything turned upside down. Lakios caught up with her again, who asked if the hero decided to play hide-and-seek. He could count to 10, and then perhaps one of them would still win. It was not entirely clear yet. The brunette actually started to panic. They caught up with her too quickly. It made her embarrassed and almost lose her balance. Because of the cloak, the man did not understand who was in front of him, flying into the sky. He grabbed the collar and was about to take off the mask to find out who was hiding under it. The shard seemed to recede into second place. He was angered by the fact that someone was trying to escape from him. The body was pressed against the roof, which almost immediately began to crack. The darkness inside immediately realized that there was a woman in front of them, without even having to remove the mask. Lakios froze. He began to realize that he knew the one in front of him. The dark hair was familiar, and a strange feeling enveloped him completely, forcing him to feel the same as when Avalon was next to Lady Yuri. The man was about to make sure when the girl forcefully hit him in the groin with her knee. She forcefully threw him over and began to wrap him in web. She did it deftly, so as not to let him waste precious time. The blonde remained silent the whole time. It was as if he did not even try to resist. The blue-eyed man stared at the girl. The worm inside him began to rage again, because he didn't understand why his master was hesitating when the girl was only a tooth away from him. He persistently suggested using the power of ruins. The heroine could not imagine that such a force would destroy her. Carnomele continued to be silent, but then answered briefly, "No." The beast was even surprised when he heard the refusal. Usually the master doesn't mind giving someone a dressing down or getting more answers. The blonde tried to argue that the power of the ruins is intended for murder. If you miscalculate, the girl could die, and then there will definitely be no information to be obtained. The young man was just trying to remain rational enough, nothing more, but only he thought so. His inner voice didn't understand what would happen next. No one worries about such things. The young man clenched his fist tightly and nodded. He himself understood that this was completely out of his style, but for some reason, he didn't want to hurt Yuri. When the girl was about to run away again, the blue-eyed man abruptly tore the web and asked her to stay. Horror crept under his bones. Everything happened too quickly and easily. The heroine began to understand that unfortunately, she would not be able to escape. She had hidden the clothes she had prepared in the alley. She needed to change them and get lost in the crowd. This was the only real way out of the situation. The brunette was already about to go down into the deserted alley, but noticed a person there. When the stranger turned around, it became clear that the lady in front of her was none other than Anne-Marie. The woman landed, and this caused the beauty to accidentally fall to the ground. She tried to back away. She began to ask in a quiet voice who the man was standing in front of her and what he wanted. They did not start a conversation, because being in her mask, the heroine could not reveal her identity so easily. 10 minutes ago, Blunt was still talking to Miss Muriel, while her little sister stood next to Leo. The boy was worried, not understanding what to do next. A person noticed him, but Yuri told him not to get into trouble, so it is not clear what the strategy of action should be. While he was thinking, Hestia looked at the baby and wondered if it was a dog or a cat. The brunette involuntarily recalled the lady's words, the tone in which she said it. The woman was serious, and he did not want to disappoint her. He began to fear what would happen next if he suddenly angered the lady again. The dog took off. He decided that the best strategy would be to retreat. Instead of staying on the street, the little girl rushed after him straight into a dark alley. By that time, Anne-Marie had finished her conversation. Marielle wished them a good time and waved goodbye. The blonde immediately went to the counters to pick up her sister. Of course, the child wasn't there, but looking around, the heroine noticed her mask lying on the ground near some boxes. The brunette was still standing in the alley in horror, unable to move. Realizing that the situation was at a standstill, she had to appear at such an inconvenient moment. It was like a special power of the main characters. To get into trouble, the green-eyed girl looked at the stranger. He was wearing a man's tailcoat. Perhaps Hestia had been kidnapped by someone similar to him. Footsteps were heard behind her, and then another scream. The main villain had almost caught up with the girl. She had almost no time left. She would have liked to just stand up, put the couple next to her, and tell them about the future, explaining that, although it wasn't Anne-Marie who saved Avalon, it was she with whom he would fall head over heels in love. The brunette understood that of course it was better not to risk it, so that no problems in the form of a beating would arise later. Red Eyes was very wrong when she started moving in this wrong direction. It was a mistake to assume that the ruler of the dark world wouldn't attack just because there was an ordinary person nearby. Avalon wouldn't understand what the problem was and would quickly deal with the random witnesses of the conversation. It would only make things easier for him. Unlike the original Anne-Marie, the current one is not Lakios' benefactor. He can easily deal with her without seeing any problems. The girl conducted an analysis, realizing that Blunt was in danger, and moreover, because of her friend, because it was she who saved Avalon, the maiden decided to save her acquaintance. Therefore, grabbing her, she quickly launched arrows from the web forward. She ran away again, leaving the man with nothing. The worm inside began to whisper that the stranger seemed to possess the power of ruins. The master ordered him to be silent while he tried to think, just in case the hero defended himself from the attack. But Yuri didn't hit him at all. Perhaps she really didn't want to hurt him, because in the end, the young man remained safe and sound. What happened prompted him to think that under the mask was his savior. They heard footsteps and shouts from the servants at the auction. They rushed into the alley, but Lakios, having cut all the arrows in time, climbed onto the roof. They looked around and realized that there was no one. Only traces of wire or something similar remained. It was those two who made a noise when they went out to look for a suspicious character. Due to poor preparation, the sage's stone and some other valuables were stolen. Security should have been strengthened to prevent problems next time. The guys quickly lost interest and decided to leave. There were still many tasks to complete, but the man was still missing. The woman managed to run far enough. She looked around. The pursuit ended, which meant apparently Lakios lost all desire to do something incomprehensible. The brunette did not attack him in order to kill or wound. Of course, she could have broken his leg or cut off his limbs, but such an opponent would have been able to do that. Anne-Marie was quiet the whole time because she didn't understand what had happened, and she was scared. Finally, she came to her senses and started shouting something about Hestia. Even without Yuri's explanation, she understood what had happened. Of course, Blunt wouldn't have gone into the alley without a reason. She was probably looking for her sister who had gotten lost. The woman said that everything would be fine. They would find the girl together. The heroine had previously promised to do everything to keep her friend safe, and she intends to fulfill her promise. The web, as is well known, can be used for various purposes, such as hunting, attacking, or something like tracking. For the latter, the web is impossible to see with the naked eye, which makes the method even more versatile. The length of the thread increases almost to infinity, which makes the web very useful for preparing for the festival and actually finding a friend as soon as the auction is over. The lady attached one thread to her and her sister. Her strength came in handy because now finding the baby will most likely not be difficult. The girl looked where the lady was, and in just a few minutes, she already knew where they would have to go. So as not to waste time, she jumped up and jumped over several more rooftops, stopping in an alley. Yuri lowered Anne-Marie to the ground. The woman pointed to the right with her hand. After a while, when the lady thought about what was happening, she finally realized that in Blunt's eyes, the situation looked terrible. It wasn't even that the beauty got into an altercation between two strange people, and not even that she was kidnapped by a suspicious person. Everything was tied to something else. The girl decided to slightly improve the situation, and at least apologize, which is exactly what she did. She smiled slightly to seem kinder. The figure quickly disappeared, and Anne-Marie was unable to stop it. The man said the last phrase in a very familiar voice. The girl could be mistaken, but the red eyes under the mask and dark long hair were very reminiscent of someone she knows. Blunt decided not to think about those little things that didn't make sense to her anymore. She jumped up and rushed forward to the place where the stranger pointed. In the end, Hestia was found. She was lost and sat sadly on the ground, not understanding where to go next. She was scared until she heard a familiar voice. The little girl jumped up almost immediately and ran to her sister, who began to hug her. Blunt asked how the child could disappear so suddenly. Without warning anyone, she was very worried about her. The conversation dragged on until it became clear that it was 9 o'clock in the evening. Fireworks appeared in the sky, which meant that it was time to quickly go to the tower to meet her friend. The girl went down to the alley where she had clothes to change into. Once everything was done, she took out a shard located in a transparent jar. The woman can tell the client that she failed. She only has a few questions left because it is not clear what to do with the shard that she managed to get. The brunette understood that she didn't have much of a choice, so she would have to think more actively so as not to miss anything. If she hid the thing at home, there wouldn't be enough time, and then she would be late for the meeting with Anne-Marie. The lady also couldn't take the box with her because Lakios was still wandering somewhere in the crowd. She was afraid that if they met, most likely, the man would take the fragment of ruins. There was a creak behind her. The heroine was sure that she had checked the alley several times, and there was no one there. She thought that she had stumbled upon Avalon again, but instead, she met Leo's gaze, who clearly did not expect to see her, because he jumped up feeling scared. The boy began to shake, remembering Arachne's words before she left on a mission. He didn't understand what to do next, because this time everything could be much worse. Instead of scolding, the woman leaned over and handed him something. She said that Leo had arrived just in time, so having taken it, he had better go back. The boy opened his eyes, looking around before that he had closed his eyes because he thought that the consequences would be terrible. The brunette told him that he needed to be as careful as possible to avoid getting into as much trouble as possible, and that he shouldn't meet with people while carrying the shard. She stroked the boy's head and asked if he could handle it. Receiving an affirmative nod, she waved to him as he quickly ran off. The woman arrived at the meeting place. Everything was finally fine near the tower. She met Anne-Marie and her sister. They looked a little confused. Apparently, what happened had affected them a little, and not in the best way. Blunt apologized for being late. They were going to arrive earlier, but some difficulties arose that stopped them on the way. The brunette said that everything was fine. She also arrived later than the appointed time. The heroine leaned over to Hestia and asked if everything was okay. Noticing that she must have been scared while they were talking, her friend examined the clothes. The white mask definitely had a different outfit, and he ran away in the opposite direction from the tower. The little girl asked Arachne how she knew what had happened, and it turned out it was all written on her face, nothing more. Anne-Marie laughed, saying she thought she'd been mistaken, and after that, the three of them headed to the main square to join the others in watching the beautiful fireworks. At first, they stood in silence, until Blunt gently touched the lady. She was pleased that the heroine found the time to meet. The blonde always wanted to attend the festival together, and now her dream came true. It all seemed like some kind of dream turning away. The lady nodded. The situation was touching, but she did not feel anything since she did not have feelings on a subconscious level. Anne-Marie was exactly the same character, even in the book. Nothing special. Everything was the same. Her father died. The family was persecuted for debts. She had a hard time considering the whole situation. The heroine was forced to seek a permanent home for herself, but could never find anything. She wandered from place to place with Hestia, unable to find a permanent home or friends who could support her. She is the main character who lived in different places by the will of fate itself. The brunette also had no friends, but the situation was a little different. The green-eyed one lowered her head. She assumed that she was annoying with her excessive friendliness, but she still really wanted to talk, and yet opening her mouth again, she noticed that the fireworks were amazing. They say that they were made by Eastern alchemists. Yuri sees this spectacle every year, but for the first time, it seems incredibly beautiful to her because she is watching it with her friend. If it weren't for Anne-Marie, she wouldn't have been able to really appreciate how wonderful the festival is. So she thanks her from the bottom of her heart, the words causing the lady to blush and smile sincerely. The girl extended her hand and suggested they go have some fun. They first went to the food stand, then to the gift stand, and so on down the list. The entertainment was supposed to occupy her thoughts, but Yuri realized she was bored. Sometimes it was useful to spend time this way, but for some reason, the lady couldn't stop feeling strange. She just wanted to go home. The announcer's voice distracted her from her thoughts. The Pass the Flower event began. Two servants stepped forward and offered a flower to each participant. The blonde, of course, became interested and began asking questions. What was happening could be called something like the final spring event. In short, Pass the Flower is a boring event for young people to meet each other. Those who want to participate are given one plant each, and then they all have to show off their charm within a certain amount of time, through speech, physique, or singing, in which case all talents are taken into account. In the end, they always choose the person who wants to hand over the flower. The one who gets the most flowers will be awarded the title of King of the Year and a cash prize that many are hunting for Yuri. The game was stupid, and the name was too simple. Definitely not for her. Blunt, as usual, had a different view of what was happening. The girl thought the event was interesting, and despite the fact that she liked the flowers, it was decided to return home, since it was already quite late. Outside participation was not necessary, and it was already time for Hestia to go to bed. She seemed to be too tired. The girls agreed with each other, and were about to leave when a man appeared in front of them. At first, the brunette thought that Damon Salvatore was in front of them, but his long red hair made her realize that this was not the case. Anne-Marie immediately quietly asked the girl if she knew the stranger. It became obvious that he was not one of those known to Blunt. It was someone else. The lady could not immediately make up her mind, realizing that she would need time because of the mask. The guy almost started serenading the goddess of love, and the moon did not pass by him. All these words reminded one visitor to the coffee shop who constantly told all sorts of interesting little things, trying to seem romantic. The heroine, for some reason, assumed that the man wanted to give a flower to her friend. That would be logical. The confession didn't take long to come. The hero declared that he wouldn't mind giving the most wonderful person a rose. Arachne leaned toward the green-eyed one. If she didn't want to accept flowers, she always had the right to choose. Usually those who didn't want to accept gifts from strangers said they didn't take part in events. The red-haired man exceeded all expectations. Taking the rose, he handed it to Yuri, and kneeling began to tell her that this flower was incredibly suitable for her. Having risen abruptly, the hero noticed that he had also accidentally made a mistake for a lady like her. One flower would not be enough. At least several more, just as beautiful, were needed. The man hid the flowers in his sleeve and held out two. But even that didn't quite work, as the lady started waving him off, realizing she didn't even need that. After some time of refusals, the stranger created a whole bouquet, and after the lady didn't even accept that, he tossed it into the air, and the petals covered the road and the interested people watching. Leaving himself with just one rose, the hero carefully reached out to the maiden and tucked it behind her ear. He wasn't going to stay close any longer. Turning around, he waved, wishing her good night. The crowd gradually began to disperse. There was nothing left to look at. The woman gently touched her hair. Everything around her was in a tangled state. It was reminiscent of Euphoria. She couldn't help but accept the rose when she thought that her favorite character was giving it to her. Anne-Marie's scream brought her out of her thoughts. She pointed forward, asking about the man, as if the brunette knew him. Blunt knew from the start that the man was going to approach her friend, not her. The young man fell in love at first sight, just like in a novel. Hestia started asking questions. Yuri couldn't help herself, so she muttered something about thrillers having romance too. She didn't want to seem weird, so after the question, "What?" she waved him off. Within a second, a crowd had formed around the friends. Again, everyone was shouting, asking the girls to accept their flowers. It turned out that the event was quite a popular place, which was clear from the very beginning. Arachne began to get irritated by what was happening again, while Blunt was more joyful. This was all new to her. Without thinking twice, her friend grabbed the blonde by the hand and pulled her along, who managed to catch Hestia at the last moment. They were cornered, so they had to go outside. While the brunette dragged the girl, she shouted along the way that they were not participating in the events and sincerely asked for forgiveness. She had a kind soul, so leaving everything as it was not on her list. After some time, the three broke away from the main crowd. When they were at a decent distance, they had to say goodbye to go home. The two went home by a different route. Yuri was a little doubtful about this plan, but hoped that everything would be okay with them. For herself, she decided to choose the usual path. The girl noticed that the flower that was given to her was a little strange. It quickly withered. She wanted to keep it, but later realized that if that man really was Xenos, it should be thrown away. Of course, there is no proof that it was Sheldon, but if it was really him, the rose should have gone to Anne-Marie. That was not entirely right. The woman decided to get rid of the stem after all. She didn't want to throw it away just anywhere so as not to create an illegal dump, so she went to the trash can. Xenos, meanwhile, barely escaped. Left alone, he began to ask himself questions, not understanding why he was giving the bouquet to Mrs. Yuri at all. It was not like him. He'd been following Arachne from the start, and then he saw her with the unfamiliar girl who'd been with her at the festival. He pondered the purpose of all this, and quickly concluded he was simply a little bored. Someone hit him on the head, startling him out of his thoughts. But when he turned around, he saw no one. The beast inside Lachios quietly asked what his master had done. He didn't see any problem, he'd just kicked one of the stones on the street. The blue-eyed man hadn't realized that this man was irritating him so much. Perhaps it would have been easier to drag him to a quiet place and kill him there so that everything would be calmer. The hero didn't answer. He continued to build a chain of events. Everyone has difficult moments, so Darkness asked to share his experiences. The blonde just laughed. He did not see a problem and decided not to kill Sheldon. The lady received some strange flower from a stranger, but this does not mean anything. He did it by accident or out of boredom. The lady probably did not attach any importance to it. The person who is closest to the heroine is still Lachios. He even eats the food she prepares, and will do the same tomorrow. This is what he needs. The only thing the hero did not understand was why Yuri accepted the flower. At first, she refused. Xenos clearly did not interest her. Maybe the lady liked his witchcraft. Lachios also has magic, but it is not so wonderful, and certainly not for women's eyes. If only Avalon had found the auction where the sage's stone was sold much earlier, that man would have broken his forearm before he could approach Yuri walking through the streets. The blonde, already on edge, began to get even more angry because there were too many frog masks around. The blue-eyed man was indignant, but all this was exactly until the moment when the figure of Arachne appeared in the distance. The man immediately found someone with a mask and took it away without saying anything. The stranger stood in line for a frog for about half an hour because he was very upset. The brunette made her way through the crowd. There were even more people around than in the main square. The flower-related event was being held there, and the lady sincerely didn't understand why it was so popular. The heroine tried to push people aside with her elbows, but it wasn't that easy. Someone stepped on her foot, forcing her to close her eyes. By chance, the lady almost fell, but at the last moment she was caught. She turned around and saw the same frog mask in front of her. It could have been a good disguise, but the beauty immediately realized that it was Lachios in front of her. They accidentally held hands, and it was this that made her experience that very special feeling again. Sales of frog masks suddenly increased, all because of one man who put on a show on the main street. The heroine was frightened when she saw Avalon in front of her. At first, she thought that he had tracked her down, but instead of killing her, the young man, with a slight movement of his hand, took out the rose that was in my lady's hair. The girl froze. She carefully examined the guy, almost surrendering to the moment. Again, he did not behave like a crazy killer, but was very polite, just as the current situation required. Leaving the rose in his jacket, Avalon, without saying a word, went ahead, preparing to leave the event. Perhaps this was a warning for the lady not to stick her neck out again and not to accept flowers from strangers. It was incredibly difficult to say for sure. Red-Eyed wanted to understand a little more, but she couldn't. She knew Carnival well enough. If he had the chance, instead of explaining, he would probably drag the lady into some alley and deal with her right away, where there were no people. In any case, the lady had changed her clothes and gotten rid of the shard, so Lachios had no way of catching out the deception. No matter how much the heroine thought everything was wrong, she did not understand why she stole a fragment of ruins from an auction. She received a large payment for a client's task, which in the end was failed. Everything did not end the way the brunette wanted. The payment for her service was a fragment that did not carry such a large monetary value. The girl was preparing dinner and continued to theorize something was still bothering her. The red-eyed girl had no intention of becoming stronger. With the help of the ruin, it would not be very safe for her to have something so powerful on her. The beauty suggested that she could get rid of the thing by making a deal with Damon Salvatore. That would be a good start. Even if the great alchemist doesn't have the best character, he still won't conduct inhumane experiments. He will agree to pay a high price. The woman was constantly reaching for the salt that was on the top shelf. She usually used the web, but this time she didn't do that. Lachios appeared behind her and helped her get the box without any difficulty. After the festival, Yuri watched her guest closely. No significant changes had occurred. Speaking of other things, Arachne realized that his health was improving. The man said that he could now speak at least a few words, although before he could only write on a piece of paper. The girl heard what the hero said when they met by chance. She will probably never get it out of her head now he is stroking the lady's head. If someone said that yesterday they fought, and the hero almost caught her, it would sound quite strange. If only the young man in the novel treated Anne-Marie the same way, everything would be much better, and especially easier. The girl doesn't know if he could be the main character who surrounds everyone with flowers. The answer to this question will never be the heroine involuntarily imagined how the blonde could get along with Blunt. She felt good just from the thought they stood in the kitchen in silence until a knock was heard on the door, which ruined the whole moment. Avalon's expression changed almost immediately. He was angry that someone had come to the mistress and that it had been that early in the morning. The girl grinned because all his feelings had come out again. She realized that the idea of a man being the main character was more than absurd. Such a person could only ruin the novel without doing anything good. The red-eyed girl decided not to stand and not make the one who seemed to have come to see her wait. The girl promised that she would return soon and asked him to look after the soup. Her friend didn't mind, and he almost immediately went to the kitchen. Hestia, a fairly frequent but always welcome guest in her house, appeared on Yuri's doorstep. The brunette asked why the lady had come so early. The little girl handed over a basket. It turned out they didn't have any eggs, and if the girl would lend them a couple, they could have breakfast. The heroine agreed and asked to come inside to wait. Of course, this would worry Lachios, but leaving a child alone on the street wasn't the best idea. The green-eyed girl, oddly enough, refused asking for forgiveness for the intrusion. A few minutes later, the lady returned with eggs, which she placed in a basket. She decided to keep the conversation going a little. The little girl had gotten up early and was probably tired. Instead of agreeing, the girl shook her head decisively. The blonde felt great and promised herself that when she grew up, she would not sleep at such an hour. The friend chuckled. She also sleeps late when she doesn't have to go to work and doesn't see any problem with it. The child shook her head decisively. She'll manage to balance everything. She's already big, which means she doesn't sleep too long. And that way, she always has more free time. The girl has already planned something for herself in the morning. The brunette nodded, but decided to check something, so smiling, she offered her some candy. The blonde gathered all her composure, saying that she didn't really want it, because she remembered that candy as a rule rots teeth. She could refuse, but it would be impolite to say no to the hostess. The best option was to accept the treats with gratitude. The red-eyed girl pretended that the candies were gone, which of course upset the girl. In order not to prolong the intrigue too much, she reached into her left pocket, saying that she simply mixed them up. After that, they said goodbye, wishing each other a good day. The beauty remembered that next time she should go to the candy store. The woman came to her senses. She had to return to the house. Lachios was sitting at the table, setting the table for two. Of course, Yuri was surprised, because she couldn't imagine Avalon in the kitchen. As soon as she ate one spoonful, she froze in amazement, because she couldn't believe how it was possible to create such a wonderful dish from the ingredients in her house. The heroine decided to thank him. She didn't know that her friend could cook so well. It was even surprising the man promised that this would happen every day, and changing the subject asked who came. The woman immediately said that it was Hestia. She is a neighbor. Two sisters live in the house. The eldest does not have time to go to the market, so the younger one sometimes comes for groceries. The blonde nodded and repeated the fact that only these two lived there. The brunette frowned almost immediately. She realized that she had been wrong when she told such a truth. If the man met Anne-Marie, everything would go according to the original plot. But the beauty was not at all happy with this scenario. Rather, it irritated her. In fact, the young man was happy that he was the only one living with the girl. They had a completely different view of the situation. It was decided to change the subject. The girl asked if the gentleman was tired. Lachios wanted to say that nothing hurt, but realized that if so, Yuri could try to ask him to leave initially. She left him earlier, only to look after him. The boy quickly grabbed a piece of paper and wrote something down again. Looking down sadly, he showed that his wounds were hurting badly again. The girl was right. It was due to overexertion. The woman sympathized and offered to help him get to the sofa. When the hero was laid back on the bed, they said goodbye to him. Yuri promised that she would be back soon. The door closed. The lady almost immediately fell into thought. Everything that was happening was strange at the festival. The young man looked very cheerful when he was chasing her on the roof. Of course, she did not know the details, but he could have been injured after their meeting. perhaps all because of those arrows. However, the man could have dodged. In any case, she did not feel guilty about it. Blue-eyed decided not to get out of bed. The worm called him. The blonde decided to play the situation to his advantage, to get rid of the traitor. Physical and mental stability is needed only for this purpose. The hero uses the naive and kind lady, who is trying with all her might to help caring for his health. Darkness exhaled with displeasure. The man was making excuses, although nothing had even been asked. As a question, Avalon seemed unable to come to his senses. If he needed to appropriate the small house, it would be easier to deal with the brunette before it was too late. And if he wanted this woman, he needed to force her to be his puppet by any means necessary. As the ruler of Carnival, the young man has the right to do as he pleases. Such a person cannot be a servant in the house of a lady from the East. The worm changed the subject. Lachios should continue cooking if they remain living in the house. The blue-eyed man waved his hand, repeating once again that the lady actually cooks deliciously. The man still decided to finish what he started. He will continue to look for those he came for, and they will give Avalon everything they want, and in other places they will also do everything that is needed. In fact, he will not do this in order to teach them a lesson, and he has no idea whether they will have a fragment of the ruins or that guy in the white mask. This time, regardless of the outcome, the young man would be pleased. As usual, there weren't many customers in the cafe. The lady handed him a cup of strong coffee, which her regular guest had ordered. She saw how, as usual, he began to smile and try to say something romantic. His words were almost always out of place. The girl immediately figured out what she could do. She asked the guy if he had been to a recent event. She assumed that he was wearing a frog mask and putting on a show. Of course, she knew how the man might react, but she decided that it was worth a try. Snow thought, as if he needed to tailor the story to the listener. The guy started laughing. He asked if the girl wanted to see him. He suggested going to the next festival together, because this option was probably the best turning away. The brunette angrily said that she would never agree to such a thing, wishing her a pleasant coffee. She was about to go to the next table. Instead of leaving the lady alone, the man said that the aroma was different from usual. He wondered if the heroine had changed the coffee beans. She nodded lately. They were using beans from Beryllia. The young man thought that these were Carcana beans. But this was not so because they were too expensive. Turning, she asked if Snow had tried this kind of coffee. The hero choked slightly. He didn't think that he would accidentally give himself away. Laughing nervously, he said, "Well, it seems like he tried such coffee once completely by accident. That's why the aroma seemed ordinary to him." The red-eyed girl nodded, but she understood that she had probably just been lied to. Carcana beans are incredibly expensive. Ordinary people call the coffee made from them. Royal ordinary people do not know either its taste or its aroma. Perhaps the hero was bluffing, but this is most likely also not true, because if it were in Snow's character, he would have said something strange, the same as usual. The man spoke quite calmly. Arachne guessed that he was not an ordinary slacker. Half an hour passed. The young man said that, as usual, it was very tasty, but he would still like to offer something as a thank you. Sitting down at the counter, Snow smiled charmingly. The lady waved him off and said she wasn't religious, but it turned out the guy wasn't talking about religion. He'd been really bored lately, so he wouldn't mind learning something. Exhaling, the lady decided to ask anyway, just to get him off her back. It turned out the young man wanted to learn palmistry. Realizing that asking was a mistake, the lady turned away and told the young man to come back next time without leaving. The brunette said with a smile that he could also guess fate by facial features. The woman did not turn back. She just needed to answer briefly, and then he would leave quickly. Looking at the lady, the man asked her to beware of the bird, so that she would not have problems. The girl froze. She already thought that he knew something, but no, smiling stupidly. Snow said that it is very easy to stumble upon bird droppings lately. He has been very interested in the art of fortune-telling, and does not even know how he saw the figure of a bird on the waitress's face. The girl felt a little uncomfortable talking to the young man, so she waited until he got tired of it, and when he was about to leave, he wished her a good day, and thanked her again for the coffee. When he went out as usual, he was attacked by crows, and ended up leaving a surprise on his head. The man screamed and then ran away. Yuri remained thoughtful. She remembered that no one had ever noticed her connection with the crows. She was no longer sure where the truth was, and where the lie. It did not seem that the young man had just said this. This time the screams of Zeno Sheldon were heard again. She remembered the moment when the man died in the novel. He was mourned for a long time. The power of foresight is very similar to prophecy. The girl froze. She was not sure whether Snow was really her favorite character. From the novel, she did not know how to react to this. There were always guesses, but no one had ever proven it so directly to her face. Speaking of the book, the lady's favorite character appears in the episode The Disappearance of Orphans Without a Trace. Xenos was investigating the disappearance of orphans from an orphanage. He didn't do it just because he wanted to. It happened at the request of the Crockford family, who appointed him as the investigator of the case, which was a rather important position. In the same section, the main character of the novel, Callian Crockford, appeared, and his assistant was Sheldon. Unfortunately, among the missing children was Hestia. She accidentally got lost when she went out into the street, and most likely she was captured by one of those who was behind the disappearance of the orphans. Fate itself brought the novel's main characters together. That day they met for the first time. Anne-Marie cried and didn't understand where her little sister had gone, and the man supported her. In the novel, the little girl played the role of Cupid piercing Callian and Blunt with an arrow of love. Their story would not have begun if it hadn't happened. The problem was that the girl was throwing arrows everywhere, thereby shamelessly making a lot of men fall in love with Anne-Marie, who found her beautiful. Because of this behavior of Hestia, many readers began to consider her a problem for them. She was an unpleasant character who in fact only got in the way. When the girl first read the book, she wondered if there were too many events for one novel. The child, the heroine's younger sister, constantly gets into various troubles. Any child is highly likely to suffer psychological trauma. The author shouldn't have done something like that because readers really felt sorry for Hestia. Now that Arachne was in the book, she could change everything. She was determined to prevent the kidnapping of the baby. Because of her decision, the first meeting of the main characters would not take place. But nothing was more important than the safety of Anne-Marie and her family. Ultimately, the brunette didn't feel anything, so she wasn't sorry at all. If this is truly fate that cannot be changed, an insignificant character, like Yuri, will not be able to influence the reunion of the main character, and Callian Xenos will have his own story. Not getting involved with the lady is his path to a long life. According to the story, he died almost immediately, but this option did not suit the girl she was going to protect him too. The girl sat in the cafe. While there was not a single person, she was tired, so she fell asleep right on the counter lately. She thinks too much about the character, perhaps because Lakios is always at home. As a real reminder, if the heroine, as Arachne, catches him and investigates his case, she will never be able to find out whether Snow is Xenos' favorite. Still, the girl couldn't give up on the idea. She remembered those moments when she lay at home and didn't know what to do. Only the situation was different. Coco was a support, while the brunette cried that she seemed to have failed her exams. The dog always tried to help, and then, as usual, she brought a book the girl would enjoy reading, so that she would no longer be focused on grades. The girl loved her job. She liked everything. As a fan of the book, she should not share secrets that should not be revealed. She smiled, thinking about what would happen to her if Snow really was Xenos Sheldon. No one knows what it will be called between them. There is a huge gap, but it could be the same person. A sound was heard outside the coffee shop. It seemed like crows. 4 cawings meant that Odin was outside. Yuri leaned out of the window. A feather fell into her hand, on which was a sign they were supposed to meet. In 3 days, the girl was distracted from the inscription because new customers finally arrived. Something had happened in the alchemist's tower. Since early morning, Damon was angry and thus frightened everyone who worked there. He remembered those eyes that were filled with calm. Sheldon irritated him greatly, and on a constant basis. Since he was kicked out, the young man had not seen a single hair of his. It seemed like he was always hiding in a rat hole. Sitting down on a chair at his desk, the man called one of the alchemists to him. He needed to study the case of Xenos. It turned out that he already knew something. It was secret information. The question of reinstating this man in his position had recently been raised, and the elders had held a meeting to vote. Salvador, when he heard about this, immediately laughed. What was happening irritated him. It was as if the Alliance had a group senile dementia. One of the alchemists asked to be silent because someone could overhear their conversation. The man said that this was the pure truth, of which he was not ashamed. Even if so, some expressions should be avoided. Initially, the old men took the initiative to expel Xenos, but then they changed their tune. There is nothing in the protocol about that guy, which means there is no final decision. The alchemist nodded. He asked to find out what his enemy has been doing lately. He thought that he was in the shadows, but it seems that is not entirely true. The conversation turned to the auction. The gentleman was still supposed to be searching for the sage's stone. It seemed that it would be easier to give up, but but the man decided to continue the words, confused Salvatore, and he nervously had to ask if there was a break in the search. He wanted to think that this was not true, and the location of the relic would soon be known. At that time, Lachios arrived in the hall, where the auction was originally taking place. The hall was a labyrinth. It seemed they had something to hide. The blonde did not find the exit, but he understood that he could not leave. One of the servants stood behind him. The young man was muttering something under his breath, but it didn't matter. The young man had gone too far, but now he would be finished. Taking out a knife, the brunette wanted to pounce. From behind, the blue-eyed man dodged in time, making the stranger surprised by such dexterity. In Avalon's opinion, the man was worthless. He was just a small insect, nothing more. He was different from the previous mercenaries. Most likely a professional, pressing the brunette against the wall and starting to press harder and harder. Carnival menacingly asked if he knew where the event manager was. One of the ways to get out of the labyrinth is to get a right hand and go with it. They say that it is quite simple, but at the same time quite effective. Having lifted the servant, the man dragged him along with him. After 10 minutes, they again found themselves at a crossroads. They had to ask where to go next. The young man said that they needed to turn left. He knew it was a trap and thought it would work. Lachios didn't trust anyone, so he forced him to give a truthful answer. The brunette was afraid for his life, so he had no choice. He just wanted what was happening to end as soon as possible. The young man lied too brazenly. It irritated the gentleman. Avalon was busy, so he decided not to bother the young man again, for now allowing him to drag along, since the blonde was still in a good mood. Asked what he would be doing when he was asked the question, smiling, he answered that he was going to spend the evening with a dear person. The servant assumed that Avalon had a wife. The laughter made him think that he said something wrong. The man patted him on the head, saying that he almost guessed so as not to talk to him anymore. The hero decided to quickly deal with the owner. He kicked open the door and noticed a small man there. The brunette said he would do everything as it should be, but instead, he led Lachios straight to the boss. The blonde was in a state of strength, his foot twitching with irritation and anger. The manager stepped back and asked for mercy, but it seemed the man didn't care. From now on, only Avalon would ask questions, and if he was late with an answer, death would follow. It was the old man who put the sage's stone up for auction. He remembered it almost immediately. He sent employees to return the thing, but nothing happened. Abruptly removing his mask, the young man menacingly asked where the stone came from. It could not have been discovered just like that, which means someone was behind it. After the conversation, the hero finally came outside. The beast inside was tired. What was happening was not so important. The blue-eyed one clicked his tongue in displeasure. Initially, his plan was different. He came to find out if someone else was behind this, but instead, he accidentally found out something else that made him feel wrong. The leader was completely useless. He lied when asked about the other fragments, and for this, he learned what death was. If Lachios had known about what happened earlier, he would not have let the masked man go. He realized that he was right after all, when he assumed that the girl was none other than Mrs. Yuri. Hearing such thoughts, the worm sighed with displeasure. They hadn't seen Arachne for only a few hours, and the man was already trembling as if he was bored. When the blonde was told that he seemed to have become dependent, he had to fight back. The girl's workday would soon end, and they should hurry home. After the girl left the coffee shop, she went to the cemetery to return to Leo. Scratching the baby behind the ear, she asked how things were, and whether any suspicious people had appeared. According to him, everything was calm. The boy turned out to be an excellent watchman, and for this, he again received praise. The brunette nodded, took out some kind of package, and handed it over. It was a gift. The young man hadn't received candy for a long time, and was happy that they finally brought him what was promised. In fact, experimental organisms don't need nutrients, including the wolf cub. He shouldn't be looking for food, but because of his past memories, he's constantly searching. Leo really loves sweets, which isn't cute at all, because he was experimented on at a very early age. Sometimes the girl feels sorry for him, but she doesn't have any feelings, so those moments are very rare. The lady knelt down in front of the guy and offered to change into clean clothes. The boy turned around his face, covered in the remains of candy and packaging that were stuck to his forehead and cheeks. The brunette thought they need to sort this out quickly so she can go home. Handing over a napkin, the woman asked to dry herself. When she entered the room, she took the piece of ruin. She understood that she needed to give the thing to Damon. If her colleagues from the lab found out, they would be very angry. After all, Arachne was also a victim of the experiments being conducted. The girl dreamed of receiving monetary compensation. At the auction, they were asking more than 2 billion gold for it, and the lady would set the price at 3 billion. Arachne remembered her days in the lab. She had an acquaintance there who was surprised that the girl was alive and well even after the drugs injected into her. The brunette sitting in the same cell with her was not exactly the same. She knew that if they conducted even one more experiment on her, everything would end in death, and if she refused, she would simply be thrown out into the street. If there were no ruined fragments or a laboratory in the world, then the girl could stay alive and live a peaceful life. She suggested that Arachne deal with the scientists. Ultimately, the woman was unable to overcome the power of the fragments. These were the last minutes of her life. Yuri doesn't understand why she suddenly remembered such distant memories. The dream did come true, though. The laboratory was destroyed, thanks to the villain living in the brunette's house. The lady hid the shard, and covering it with cobwebs, told Leo that she was leaving Celie. The lady had been buying a large amount of food and was heading to the market again. The girl waved it off when one of the sellers noticed this fact. She really liked Lakios's cooking, so it would be good if he cooked something else. As a gift for a large purchase, the man gave several tomatoes. The lady thanked him after examining her purchases. The lady suggested that her friend could cook spaghetti for dinner. She loved this dish with all her heart. She had to distract herself from her thoughts. Sometimes Arachne reproached herself because no matter how comfortable she was still surrounded by one of the most terrible villains. The girl accidentally noticed Hestia in her hands. She was holding a basket of flowers, which was clearly too big for a small child. It was clear that if the girl continued in the same spirit, she would surely fall, and that is exactly what happened. Arachne approached the little girl and asked if everything was okay and tried to help her up. The blonde jumped up herself and declared that she was okay. She did not want anyone to help her and did not think it was right. Lately, the green-eyed girl had been constantly repeating that she wasn't a child and that she would be responsible for her actions as an adult. The brunette laughed slightly, and for the first time, she was grateful to the power of the ruins for her excellent hearing because the words were spoken very quietly. A scream and the roar of a horse were heard in the distance, and the lady was so surprised that she even dropped the bag of groceries. Hestia didn't notice anything and continued to collect the flowers which scattered. The most important thing for her was that she managed to buy a gift for her sister. Arachne realized that a carriage would run over the little girl, so she managed to intercept her at the last moment, taking her out of the way. Before helping the woman realize the situation, the cart was rushing at great speed. The horse's hooves were fast, which meant that the coachman seemed to have lost control. The brunette could easily use her strength, but she understood that it was wrong because there were too many people around. The distance was enough to still have time to run. The woman grabbed Hestia. Although she did not quite understand what was happening, she was going to run back because she was afraid that she herself might not have time to make that very powerful dash to the side. Someone grabbed the lady by the elbow, and in the blink of an eye, the girl found herself on the sidewalk with the baby. She was able to see her savior. It was a brunette who suspiciously resembled someone. The roses remained on the road, but that wasn't the most important thing. Arachne remembered that when she read the novel, some people tried to convince her that the child was not a character who was constantly causing problems. She always responded with the same phrase, saying that the baby really was constantly in trouble. Yuri was constantly screaming, but she had no right to say, because the lady's favorite character was dead. A scene was unfolding in the street. The coachman was being shouted at, saying that if he didn't know how to drive, it was better not to take him on. While the shouts were getting louder, the lady was still trying to come to her senses, her eyes shining with joy. If it weren't for Hestia, the brunette would never have met the main character, who was now asking if everything was okay, his silver eyes sparkling like moon shards, and even more mesmerizing, the heroine didn't have enough words to answer, convincing that she and the child were safe and sound. All the features of the young man's face were wonderful. His elongated nose seemed to have been kissed by God, and his neat lips were created to speak only the truth. An aura of charm emanated from his whole body that was impossible to resist. No one could deny that he was the eldest son of the Crockford family. The girl almost disconnected from reality, so she had to quickly answer that everything was fine. Arachne was actually stunned when she saw him, because he was exactly as he was described in the novel, perhaps even better than it seemed on the pages of the book. She replied that in the end, no one was hurt. Everything will be fine. The red-eyed woman turned to Hestia. She needed to know if everything was okay with her. The little girl seemed to be scared. That's why she started screaming and crying. The blonde couldn't calm down. It was her sister's birthday. She wanted to give her flowers. But now they were on the street. A cart drove over them. The woman looked at the road. This was truly an annoying failure. The brunette couldn't answer anything, so she decided to calm Hestia down later. Before leaving, she thanked the man, saying again that the most important thing was that the child was not hurt. The hero said that he didn't need gratitude. After all, it was Arachne who was the first to rush to help. He noticed that the girl's leg was injured. The red-eyed woman didn't immediately notice the scratch and red knee. The guy offered to accompany them to the medical center, but the lady immediately refused. The young man was very pleasant and polite. It was even unusual. The girl herself knew where they should go and was about to finish her sentence when a realization came to her. The brunette realized that if they went to the hospital, that's where Kalian and Anne-Marie would meet for the first time. In the original, Hestia was kidnapped, and that's when the main characters met for the first time. The girl was going to prevent this from happening, which meant she had to do something to ensure the meeting still took place. It is an undeniable fact, however, that the young man saved the child from an accident by suddenly changing his attitude. Yuri declared that she would not mind receiving help. The man said that he would definitely organize a meeting, but for now he turned to the group and asked everyone to disperse. The lady pretended to have forgotten the way to the medical center. The girl felt a strange look that made her cringe. Something was wrong, but she decided not to focus on it. Half an hour later, Anne-Marie came running. She was scared because she heard that her sister had been in an accident. The blonde rushed to the girl and asked if everything was okay. Her whole face was swollen, as if a horse had kicked her right in the nose. The little girl still couldn't come to her senses. She just cried a lot. The red-eyed girl immediately greeted her friend and pointed to the man who saved the child. The brunette waved it off. In fact, the first one to throw himself under the wheels was Arachne. The lady tried to shut him up so she could start talking about his merits. Anne-Marie couldn't hold back and started crying while thanking him for the help. If something had happened to her sister, she would have had to cry with a different expression on her face. The girl was happy that in the end, everything ended well. No matter what the plot, Kalian saved the child, and they met his destiny. Just like that, the heroine will deal with Lakios herself and leave these two alone, allowing them to be in a calm relationship. The man approached Blunt, but she said goodbye because they should have gone home. Instead of offering the girl help and seeing them off, he approached Arachne and asked her to go with him. The brunette froze in doubt. What was happening seemed more like an unrealistic outcome. Kalian asked what happened because the expression on her face confused him greatly. The woman wanted to scream that they should worry about Blunt and not about her, but she could not tell the truth. The main characters, destined for each other by fate, should have felt love as soon as they met. But again, nothing worked out. Perhaps the heroes weren't supposed to start dating right away, but the lady expected that they would at least introduce themselves to each other, so as not to lose contact. The red-eyed woman sincerely didn't understand what to do now. Nothing could be fixed, or was there still a chance to turn the book into a real romance novel? The girl knew that Anne-Marie could also find love with one of the secondary characters, but she was not happy with this. Hestia approached the lady and thanked her for her help, smiling. Arachne asked her to be careful. When everyone went outside, they had to say goodbye. Kalian asked for the last time if the lady would like to be escorted home. The girl said that she had some things to do, so she was going to leave alone. The man waved his hand, and the lady went in the other direction. Something triggered a wave of memories in him. He remembered the portrait that hung in his house. Arachne was identical to the lady depicted on the canvas. The hero understood that he could be mistaken because after one incident, he had never seen his aunt's face, but he still decided to conduct a separate investigation. A voice was heard calling the hero of the East. The man turned and immediately greeted Zeno, smiling. Sheldon asked to call him by another name because he had managed to come up with a name that he used throughout his life as a cover. The lady went to a flower shop. She asked to make a bouquet of flowers that she pointed to with her finger. The brunette nodded. In fact, she was envious that the woman was buying such a beautiful bouquet. For her friend Arachne turned away and said that in fact, it was not such a grand gift. She did not see anything special in it. Red-eyed was still thinking about the main characters and came to the conclusion that there was no need to worry so much. The reason why she wanted to bring them together was because Kalian was the most normal and strong in the novel. He suited Anne-Marie more than all the other characters presented. The beauty understood that one day the lady would have to marry, in which case Kalian was indeed the best option. Anne-Marie still had options to choose from if she suddenly didn't want to. then no one would force her, while the lady was thinking a bouquet of beautiful yellow flowers had already been prepared for her. They were truly beautiful. The beauty took the bouquet and brought it to Hestia. The blonde thought that it was for her sister. She really liked something so wonderful, and she asked if she could give it to the eldest. The red-eyed girl smiled. Despite the fact that the little girl had experienced something serious, she had endured it steadfastly, because in fact this was a gift for her. The beauty has the right to give a bouquet to whomever she wants. Nothing terrible will happen if her choice falls on her sister. Before the lady left, she was stopped again. Since these flowers belonged to Hestia, she wanted to give some to Yuri as well. The girl handed over some flowers and said that it was her choice, which meant she couldn't refuse the gift. The woman walked down the street and thought for some reason it seemed that the flowers were not so beautiful and luxurious, but now they seemed to have acquired new colors. There was a man standing near the window, holding some kind of strange bag in his hands. When the incident happened, he watched from the sidelines because he was also on the street. The lady's muscular strength and inhuman speed amazed him, and also made it clear that this was not an ordinary person in front of him, but an individual. His eyes glowed with an abnormal light that did not bode well. Lakios came out into the yard. He became curious about what the stranger was doing at the window of a strange house. The beast inside suggested that he had been sent from Carnival to catch the blue-eyed man for the blonde. This seemed unreal, rather something funny. The man thought it was the worker Yuri had called. In any case, only Avalon could be close to the mistress. He would have time to kill the stranger if he did something wrong. Suddenly a scream was heard. The man was happy that if he caught the specimen, he would become rich Carnival, realized in that same second that the truth would kill him. The man approached and grabbed the brunette. Rats are usually found in sewers, but it was strange that this character was left outside. He wanted to crush the guy and kill him, but he kept resisting, saying that there had been a misunderstanding. It was difficult to explain because no one wanted to listen to him. The young man came up with a story. He began to say that he came to fix the house, nothing more. The worm inside Lakios's head began to laugh, realizing that they were being lied to again. If he didn't confess, most likely he would very soon regret how he was behaving. The blonde would not let him go so easily. The hero ordered his inner voice to calm down, because he, like a parasite, was talking too much. The young man thought they were addressing him, but the gentleman clicked his tongue, showing his obvious displeasure. The man was not comparable, even to a rat. His face was too disgusting. It was impossible to look at him. The hero walked forward, but then accidentally stepped on a bag that was lying on the floor, lowering himself. The young man examined what was inside. There was a rope, a syringe, and some other medicines as a poison. The bag was full of substances that emitted a stench. The young man thoroughly prepared himself. Turning to him, the hero looked angrily into his eyes. A second later, the bag landed right on the man's head. The blue-eyed man couldn't understand how the stranger was planning to repair the building. With this, Lakios hadn't been treated like this in a long time. No one had ever tried to deceive him so unceremoniously. The anger inside him began to boil more and more. The hero sitting on the floor tried to back away, but they didn't let him. He asked why they were treating him like this. For some reason, a brilliant thought came to his head. Apparently, the blonde is the same as the woman living in the house where the brunette came. He is also an individual. It became clear that no one lived on this street at all. He noticed that at this hour, normal people usually didn't wander the streets. At first glance, the species was beautiful and attractive, but if they didn't like someone, they would sweep the enemy off the ground, not even allowing them to fight back. Their forces couldn't be put in a single line. There was no point in fighting them. Blue-eyed was gradually becoming more and more aggressive. The conversation had taken a wrong turn, and he didn't like it at all. The hero pretended to be friendly because he really wanted it all to end, but in truth, he rolled up his sleeves and almost immediately delivered a few more blows to the enemy's face. The house the stranger was targeting belonged to Lakios. He was surprised, not understanding how he had miscalculated the beast inside, began to ask why it was necessary to talk about this, because the house had a mistress. The gentleman asked him to be silent. He simply shortened his statement a little, but nothing more. The brunette immediately began to apologize, declaring that he had come to the wrong estate. It seemed that a woman he was interested in lived on that street, but it turned out that this was not entirely true. The blonde grabbed the man by the wrist and threw him to the ground. He was eager to find out what the hero was going to do by breaking into the lonely lady's house. Grabbing his hand again, the blue-eyed man began to gradually break the stranger's fingers. When he screamed, he was asked to calm down because, according to the rules, one should behave quietly in public places. Carnimal didn't plan to stop at just his hands. He wanted to make the brunette suffer. The blonde did everything to make the man feel terrible pain, and then, leaving him alive, dumped him nearby. Usually such trash doesn't work alone. If a colleague picks him up, it will hurt much more because of the shame. The beast was perplexed. Someone could hear the screams and then come to check what happened. By associating with a criminal, a person becomes a criminal himself, but not in the case of Carnomal. Even if that person escapes Lachios, lay at home sick all day, he would be considered a madman who knows nothing about the villain. Just from imagining the reality, the young man actually felt pleased. The lady was already approaching the house. She felt that it smelled delicious and immediately realized that her friend had again prepared an excellent dinner. Since the guy began to live with Yuri, the house was always warm and cozy. This made her feel calmer. The girl entered the house and immediately greeted her guest. She was a little late due to her business, but as the young man said, everything was fine. He asked if the lady had arrived home safely, and she nodded. The young man suggested changing the windows to stronger ones since rats were getting into the house through the window. The lady liked the idea. The man managed to get up in his heart. He laughed at Lacus because he thought that if he beat him half to death, it would mean that he would not be able to escape. The blonde should have told his mistress that even so, it would not be possible to stop the situation. The man ran as fast as he could until he found himself in a strange place. Looking around, he was surprised because it was quite strange. A voice was heard that menacingly asked if the young man was going to steal Yuri's things. A wolf sitting on one of the statues quietly asked if the thief was going to do something. He was asking questions, although he already understood that he most likely did not need answers. The stranger examined the specimen and again came to the conclusion that he seemed to be lucky. No doubt it was a failed experiment before him. A guard dog, the man took out a knife to deal with the wolf and thought that this would be enough, but it seemed the situation gained momentum when Leo wanted to eat the bastard. The worm inside Lachios's head felt a wild animal smell coming from the woman. The smell was coming from the lady because she was probably wandering somewhere. Avalon didn't listen to the beast at all because his thoughts were occupied with something else. The lady came home with flowers. He wondered who gave them. The man noticed that the bouquet was even tied with a bow, and this confused him even more. He was so immersed in his thoughts that he completely missed the worm calling him. He was forced to scream, which even made him stagger. Lachios didn't understand why he had to yell like that. Darkness asked him not to be jealous. The gentleman still wants to become the woman's lover, but it's better to listen carefully and stop. No matter what the man does, the girl's expression doesn't change. It will remain exactly the same even when he confesses his love. The red-eyed woman even cooks terrible food, as if gently hinting that the young man should leave her house as soon as possible. The girl's face changes slightly only when their hands touch. The heroine isn't particularly interested in the man, so he should calm down again and finally start getting on with his life. Of all that was said, the blue-eyed man only countered that he was jealous, assuring her that he wasn't. The young man was simply irritated. The cheap bouquet Yuri had received wasn't worthy of someone like her. The few flowers and bow were completely out of place. The hero suggested that if he were the girl's admirer, he would definitely buy a huge bouquet and wrap it in colorful packaging. The blonde decided it was time to act. His hand reached for the flowers on its own. He asked the lady for forgiveness and took one stem. The lady nodded and turned around. Assuming that her guest liked something so wonderful, she did not see how his face changed dramatically. He began to get angry again. In the novel, Carnimale was obsessed with Anne-Marie, and in general, it could be explained that way. The king of the dark world who loves plants. These facts contradict each other. The girl turned and watched the hero examine the flower. Without thinking twice, she handed over the entire bouquet, saying that it matched her hair very well. Finally, Yuri began to understand why everyone around her considered the young man so handsome. If you looked at it that way, everything was more than logical. When Avalon received the gift, he blushed slightly, which he could not have expected. Maybe the plant really did suit his blonde hair. That's why the girl decided to do it. The worm, as usual, began to grumble that the gentleman had gone mad from just one bouquet. The blue-eyed man got angry. No one dared to denigrate his gift. Yuri went to the bathroom to take a bath and wash away the day. The girl remembered the expression on Anne-Marie's face, which seemed to come naturally. Emotions are a natural thing. Usually if a person is happy, they smile, and if they are sad, they cry. There is nothing unusual about what is happening. Usually, feelings come from the soul. This is logical for everyone. Unfortunately, Arachne herself was not gifted with such an opportunity to feel something so special. The red-eyed one suggested that she could at least learn to express sadness, just to pretend, since it is impossible for other people to understand her true desires. For a while, the lady thought it was more comfortable not to feel anything at all. Even in her past life, her emotions were weak, and in reality, there were no big problems in merging with the inhabitants of the town. One facial expression would be enough. The girl still wanted to feel something special again, so she got out of the bath. Turning to the gentleman, the lady said that she wanted to say something. The hero, instead of listening, took a towel and came over to dry his hair, because if he didn't do this, there was a risk of getting sick. The red-eyed woman nodded, but decided to return to what she came for. She asked to hold hands. The hero could have answered like that, but instead, he started looking for a piece of paper. Taking it, he wrote that they would not be able to hold hands. The girl asked him to do this, at least for a little while, but soon realized that it was rather strange to ask for such a thing so persistently. This was the wrong move. The blonde refused, but no one knew why. In fact, the hero was afraid that he wouldn't be able to stop there. The young lady didn't want to push any further, so she apologized for the strange request. She understood that the man didn't like it, so she promised that she wouldn't ask for anything like that again. The beauty suggested that it was because she cried every time the girl explained that, even if the tears flowed again, it was not the young man's fault, because it could be because of his cough. The woman again asked to hold hands, and this time, Lachios really could not refuse. It was beyond his strength. When their palms touched, that strange feeling appeared again. Her face was burning, and her hands seemed to be touching her soul. Tears began to flow down Yuri's cheeks again, as if she couldn't hold back. It was difficult. The hero abruptly took his hand back and moved away while sincerely apologizing. The woman looked down sadly, because she didn't understand why she was being pushed away again. Everything was mixed up. It was as if she was being left in the dark again. It felt like the end. The warm feelings disappeared, along with the touches. If Arachne were the same, she would know what to look for. Unfortunately, she doesn't know what she wants, but she wants to feel the warmth that takes over her consciousness again. The man brought the lady out of her thoughts. He gently hugged her, making her freeze. She caught her breath. Tears started flowing from her eyes again. The blonde asked for forgiveness and asked her to stand still, at least for a little while. The girl was searching for emotions and forgot that she needed to feel at least something. It was as if she was lost in a labyrinth. After a while, the lady went to bed. The worm complained about Lachios again. A man accustomed to getting everything he needed couldn't kiss the woman. Even once the young man didn't even try to find out who she really was. An inner voice was worried that the lady would turn out to be a real enemy for them. The blue-eyed man was going to take action only when he knew for sure, and that was the end of the conversation. In the morning, the woman couldn't concentrate on work. At night, when she closed her eyes, just the memory of the touch made her heart beat faster. Men were watching the lady in the cafe, eager to see her smile as usual. The girl thought about physical contact and accidentally mentioned it out loud. Everyone was surprised. Some even dropped their cups. The woman apologized and promised to clean it up. There were some mugs left in the bar down the street, so the boss lent them to her. The beauty was wondering how much they cost. It wasn't in the gentleman's nature to just take things from competitors. A familiar voice distracted her from her thoughts. Anne-Marie appeared on the threshold and waved her hand in greeting. She was happy to see her friend. Flowers were noticed on the lady's bow. The blonde was sorry to leave the gift just lying around at home, so she decided to adapt it a little. The beauty, as usual, guessed that the gift was from Hestia, which made Blunt surprised and noticed the sensitivity. The friend had no idea what had happened earlier. The green-eyed one handed over some kind of box and asked to accept a gift in return. The red-eyed one tried to say no, but she was persistently asked not to refuse. The woman didn't want to insist, but in the end, everything turned out exactly that way. She simply wanted to do something nice for her friend. She had taken care of Hestia yesterday and deserved at least some gratitude. The lady was quite sensitive to such things. The brunette exhaled and agreed. She promised that she would definitely take a look after work. Seeing how Anne-Marie almost looked upset, she had to change her course of thoughts and actions. The heroine feigned impatience. She really wanted to open the thing as soon as possible, because curiosity was getting the better of her. The blonde immediately began nodding vigorously. The woman carefully untied the bow and saw a hair clip inside the box. Anne-Marie noted that her friend always puts her hair up when she works, and if she doesn't like the gift, she could change it. The heroine decided not to change anything. She smiled, saying that everything fits. The gift is perfect, and the girl sincerely thanked her. Having seated the brunette on a chair, the blonde asked her to braid her hair. There was nothing left to do but agree. The girl said that soon she would need to grind coffee beans. She heard the cawing of crows, which meant that a guest would soon arrive. Blunt was surprised. She did not believe that her friend understood the crow language. The girl smiled, saying that there was one person who hated crows, and that he and the birds had a mutual feeling. So before he had even entered, they had already pounced on him. The guest was always supposed to order only coffee, but when he entered the cafe, he immediately asked for lemonade, saying that he wouldn't mind trying something new. The woman thought the hero liked the new beryllium grains. The brunette almost immediately noticed that the lady had a new hair clip. He had never seen such a magnificent decoration. Anne-Marie smiled, declaring that it was a gift that she had prepared. Snow began to serenade as usual. There was nothing that would not suit Yuri. Her hair was beautiful, like the night sky. The red-eyed one already knew what would happen. He met the chatterbox and the people-loving Blunt. The man knew that the silver angel from the medical center had amazing taste. The guys even suit each other a little. They behave in a similar way. Interesting thoughts flashed through their heads, but while she was bringing a straw for lemonade, something definitely happened. The woman noticed something in Snow's hair and immediately pointed her finger. There was a caterpillar on his head. The crows again did not leave the young man alone. The blonde took out a handkerchief and asked for help. The girl was already reaching out with her hand, but the man began to try to find an excuse so that they would not touch him. Everything happened too quickly. The young man accidentally hit the girl on the palm, leaving a red mark. The brunette was surprised that everything ended this way. Anne-Marie was used to taking care of her sister, so she immediately moved forward. The man apologized in return. He had reacted too harshly and had not intended to hurt the stranger. Snow thought that he couldn't allow the caterpillar to be removed with the handkerchief of a beautiful person. He had gone too far and didn't realize it. Anne-Marie laughed. She constantly touches worms when she takes care of flowers. It was not a problem for her to remove the worm. The man thought there was bird droppings in his hair, and that's why he got scared when he heard about the caterpillar. Yuri advised him not to open his mouth because a worm could crawl in there. The green-eyed girl nodded. It's true, such insects like damp and dark places. Hestia once almost ate several when she was sleeping on the lawn outside the house. The brunette didn't want to know such details, but instead of stopping, the beauty also said that a person eats about 8 spiders in a lifetime. The girls walked away. They were going to release the caterpillar outside, and Anne-Marie was going to go back to the medical center after that. When they found themselves outside the coffee shop, the heroine asked Blunt what she thought of Mr. Snow. The green-eyed girl thought that he was actually a good person. Yuri nodded. Her words meant that she had no interest in him, but she liked him as an acquaintance. With such initial data, it would be possible to start working. When the beauty was removing an insect from her hair, she accidentally noticed something red. With the help of a wig, the gentleman hides his true appearance. The situation is important. The atmosphere is different, but the essence corresponds to the content of the novel. In the original, Xenos hates being touched. When the man pushed his hand away, Anne-Marie recreated the scene of refusing anyone's help. In the original, a similar incident helped Blunt notice the scars on Xenos's heart. After this, the girl healed the wounds, as befits a main character, and then the man began to show interest. In the current situation, the plot has not advanced at all. The red-eyed one thought that everything was happening again. Only because of her, she saved Hestia from the carriage, so Anne-Marie visited her in the coffee shop. A man who looked very respectable was walking down the street. Some people recognized him as the one who saved the girl and the baby. Crockford came with the detachment to the coffee shop while the heroine was thinking about how she had ruined Anne-Marie's fate again. The blonde pointed her finger at the man walking down the street. The lady accidentally threw the caterpillar forward. It flew forward straight to Kalyan. The blonde began to scream that the lady did it completely by accident. She was not aiming. The woman did not want to exaggerate the situation, but was afraid that she would have problems. Stepping forward, the lady asked for forgiveness for everything that happened. Snow, still sitting inside the room, turned around. He couldn't believe his eyes. The man really wasn't joking when he was going to come to the coffee shop. He had recently met Kalyan, introducing himself under a false name. The brunette had asked his acquaintance what he was doing in the square, but his interlocutor had brushed him off. saying he had no intention of telling him where he was and had simply dropped in on Yuri occasionally. Crockford suggested that the hero knew the people who lived in the city while the gentleman asked about the waitress. It turned out that she was the best employee. Half of the guests said that they came just to look at her. Snow joked that such a boring person like him would not be to her taste. The brunette went into the coffee shop and started talking to Yuri. When the owner appeared in the room, he was surprised that such a rich aristocrat had arrived. The man asked what the guest would like to order and offered him coffee since the drink was the most basic on their menu. Kalian looked at the beer mug and grinned. The beauty explained that this was more of a short-term measure to stimulate alcohol sales in the town. The young man nodded, thinking that this was actually a great idea. He didn't know it was a lie, but even if he knew the truth, he most likely wouldn't be able to object. The guy refused milk or sugar and just continued to stare intently straight at the lady. After taking a sip of coffee, he almost choked it. Seemed he didn't quite like the drink. Noble people are accustomed to expensive, high-quality products that are not always easy to get in a regular coffee shop. The man drank every last drop. He offered 2 gold coins, but was corrected, saying the coffee cost 2 coppers. Since the hero had no other money, he offered to accept the change as a tip. The hero turned, looking back at Snow, and remarked on one fact he hadn't known. The lady knew a close friend of his. The knights ran into the hall. It turned out that they had problems, and because of this, they would have to immediately return back to the estate. Crockford again thanked him for the drink. He was worried about what happened the day before the meeting, but apparently everything was fine. Now he could sleep peacefully. Snow almost immediately announced that he was leaving too, and leaving a tip turned to run away. Silence fell. The gentleman thanked Yuri for his help. The man is afraid of aristocrats because he immediately falls into a stupor. Without the girl, he would have new problems. The boss sighed. They still needed to buy new mugs. The girl handed over some coins and offered to pay for the dishes. The brunette immediately waved her hand. He was grateful for the help, but even despite the budget deficit, he understood that he couldn't waste employees' money on trifles. The heroine looked down sadly. She didn't want guests drinking from mugs that smelled of alcohol. For the sake of her customers, it would be best to buy glassware. In 10 minutes, the lady managed to persuade the chef that she had proposed the right solution. He was pleased because now the service would only improve. Snow followed Crockford's trail right after him. They did meet in a coffee shop, but such a nobleman shouldn't have been walking around in such a seedy area, almost alone, with only 2 escorts. The bodyguards must be talented to have been chosen for such a role. The knights almost immediately tried to draw their swords. The master ordered them to calm down, because in front of them was a friend. Anyone would look suspicious, saying strange things, but they had met Sheldon many times. There was nothing to worry about. The boys didn't believe what was said, because the man was very different from his normal appearance. Although they were both from influential families, there was a huge difference between them. The Salvatore family had been close to Crockford for a long time, and not a single person could object to this. One day, everything changed. The day came that made everyone see the truth. The Sheldon family, which no one thought of, quickly advanced forward. At the end of the carpets, threatening even the position of the Salvatore family, the protector Xenos made everyone bow before him, although this glory disappeared with the destruction of the man. But those times, and the legendary advancement, are still talked about. The knights couldn't understand how things had turned out this way. After those events, there had been no news of Xenos. Rumors had it that he had committed suicide. It was impossible to believe that the young man had come on his own. Crockford had expressed his desire to talk to Snow. They had something to discuss. The hero said that his father wanted to see Xenos. Sheldon was asked if he wanted to return, but he smiled and immediately refused. He was tired of working. He was initially ordered not to appear in the estate until the death of the master, but something happened. It seems the head of the family needs power. After that one incident, Crockford kicked out his best defender. A lot of time passed, and after all the years he realized that he was emotional. Aunt Selina had just died then, and therefore it was difficult to cope with the loss. The man abruptly stopped the conversation. If everything goes exactly like this, it is better to leave immediately and not listen. They tried to stop Snow and call him by his real name, but he shouted again that he was unemployed, someone who should not be touched. The brunette standing behind him exhaled. He was responsible for his family. The friend probably also noticed that the cafe employee looked very similar to Aunt Selina. She looked almost identical. The man knows that Xenos would never tarnish the girl's reputation. nor does he go to the cafe only to remember her again and talk to the lady, perhaps, when the image is alive. In some sense, it heals the soul and makes you think that everything has changed. The brunette wanted to answer, but Callian continued first. He had repeatedly heard Snow remark on how beautiful the lady looked. You can't say that to your interlocutor, otherwise he will think that she only has one advantage. The guy shouted that he meant something else and didn't want to offend Yuri. The man wants to say that for Sheldon, like everyone else, it will be easier to leave the past behind. All the warm memories with Selena should not be associated with the tragedy of that day, because it would be wrong even if the hero returns back and stops pretending to be a lazy person who lives in a shack. No one will blame him except for one person. The young man exhaled. He also wanted to say something, and that is why he followed his friend. Callian returned home where his grandfather met him. He noticed that his grandson had been late lately, probably because he had found himself a girlfriend. The hero was a little busy with the cases of missing orphans. He heard that the man had found out about all the doctors and nurses this time because he thought that due to his old age, he would soon be introduced. The hero said that he didn't care. Even if something happened to him, his grandson couldn't give up so easily. He was going to bring an even better doctor. Crockford should know Mrs. Yuri from the coffee shop, which means he knows Anne-Marie from the medical center. She usually always smiles at everyone, radiating warm rays. This time, the lady would definitely be able to help because she was quite a talented person. The old man waved it off and changed the topic to the guy Callian wanted to meet. He could be called someone connected with Selena. The young man understood who they were talking about, but no nickname suited his acquaintance. Sir went to the main hall when the knight asked if he was going to continue the investigation. The man nodded confidently. The grandfather was still in the garden. He accidentally came across beautiful blue flowers that reminded him of one incident. When Selena was little, she asked to plant flowers in the greenhouse. Callian went to the portrait of his aunt. Looking into her eyes, he exhaled. Still, it didn't seem to him that the girl in the coffee shop was very similar to his dear relative. For some reason, he remembered the doctor's words about Bastian having serious health problems, especially with his heart. If the boy had told his grandfather about the lady who looked like his daughter, he like Xenos might have regained his desire to live. The young man understood that he wouldn't be able to tell. Despite his assumptions, his health was getting weaker, and upon seeing the lady, the man would probably faint. It was decided to first conduct an investigation into the disappearances and wait for Anne-Marie's treatment. Lachios was at the lady's house. The worm reminded him of that moment when they talked, and he needed to figure out what to do if the lady turned out to be his enemy. It was time to decide on the situation. The man was holding a mask in his hands, the same mask that was then on the man who ran away with a fragment of the ruin. The girl again planned to ask the young man to hold hands, but they sat in silence. The atmosphere in the room was too tense. The heroine could not understand what was happening. The blonde did not tell what happened. He was just sad, or even a little focused. 3 hours ago, the young man discovered a basket in his room that caught his attention. He decided to see what was inside, and so he carefully pulled off his cape. He understood that this would be the easiest way, and he suspected that there was something interesting inside, probably flowers. As a result, Lachios took out a mask. It wasn't even about the mask, because the smell was the same as what had come from the young lady. The man didn't know how to behave. The worm whispered something in his ear about how everything would not end well. Now, sitting opposite the brunette, the man doesn't know what to say. Having gathered his strength, he asked to ask one question. He wanted to clarify something about the festival, but stopped because he couldn't ask about the mask and about the fight they had on the roof. A familiar scent emanated from the clothes and mask, which made him startle. The young man had seen such power before, but he kept trying to deny it. The hero feels abnormal because he realized what was happening. Perhaps too late, now he regrets it. It is not clear what he really wants to know about this person sitting opposite him. It took the man some time to find out what he really wanted. So much, he wanted to know that this wasn't an enemy, that the girl was his savior, and couldn't possibly mean him any harm. He wanted to ask, and for her to tell him the truth. The brunette hoped for the best outcome. The brunette walked away. If the gentleman wants to know the truth, he can simply use his power and then erase the memory. The boy himself doesn't understand that he doesn't want to know the truth. He has too many doubts inside, and therefore, speaking the truth will only make him more confused. Doubts are deeply rooted in the man's heart. As soon as everything is justified, he will have to kill the brunette. There will simply be no choice. He shouldn't have touched the basket, because before that, the main character lived well, not knowing anything about the one who saved him. All this time, something incomprehensible was going on in her head. The red-eyed woman called out to a friend, asking if he was in pain. Carnimal said that he was just thinking, and that he didn't have to worry. He needed to ask something, but in the end, the opportunity didn't present itself. That night, the worm as usual began to shout at the gentleman. He could not find anything better to say than that her hairpin was excellent. It sounded as if he wanted the same thing. The blue-eyed man could not ask what he wanted, but still wanted to know more. The alchemist was informed that Callian Crockford was investigating the case of disappearing orphans. Lately, children have been disappearing without a trace. No one knows who is behind it, but everyone wants to know. They say that the children of aristocrats have also begun to disappear, which only increased the horror in people's reality. When it came to ordinary people, no one cared. Unfortunately, that's just the way the world works. Callian was sent only when they were afraid that the same thing would happen to their children. Apparently, that's true. Salvator sighed with displeasure. He liked the idea, but not enough. It turned out that the young man spoke with Zenos Sheldon. The assistant does not know the details, but it seems that he was offered to return back. No one cared about the man after his resignation, but now the situation has changed. If the Eastern Defender returns, things will take a different turn. The hero found something and threw it towards the brunette standing nearby. It turned out to be nothing other than a magic stone that erases all traces within a 5-meter radius. He was ordered to follow Callian on his heels. The man did not want to go to investigate, and instead suggested that the master handle these matters himself. The alchemist pretended not to hear anything, because he had another important matter. Someone passed him a note. That person had a sage stone. The girl was getting ready, as usual, to go to the cemetery in order to visit Leo and find out how he was doing. The boy wanted to tell her that he had behaved well this week. He stopped a thief. He had to put men's clothes in a basket, and this definitely deserved praise from Yuri. He couldn't wait for the lady to approach him. The guy remembered how everyone had mocked him. The scientists in the lab realized that they had another unsuccessful experiment and almost immediately threw him out. The only one who needed him was the brunette, who noticed excellent data in him. Leo has an excellent sense of smell, a loud howl, and night vision. Even when the human experiment site disappeared, the man returned to Yuri, and the girl allowed him to live near her home, bringing him food and clothing to make the conditions as comfortable as possible. The wolf didn't care what others thought. They might even hate him. All that mattered was living up to his mistress's expectations. The boy was about to go to rest when someone threw him a toy and he bit it hard. Realizing something was wrong, the gas made him pass out. At home, Lakios pondered the hidden identity of his savior. If he could judge by her behavior, he could come up with 3 stable options. The red-eyed woman could be a killer who came out of the laboratory being an enemy. She tried to kill the man from the very beginning and settled him nearby for this purpose. She could also be a mercenary, an ally sent by the master's servant. The third option, perhaps the most shaky, is that the lady could have been a good-natured victim of circumstances. It happens that people accidentally absorb the power of the shards and acquire abilities that they then try to use for their own purposes so as not to let them disappear. The blue-eyed man had a fourth option. He assumed that the lady was born in a laboratory, but then decided to live peacefully so as not to leave the man lying on the street. She took him and went out. Hearing all this, the worm began to scream because the words seemed more than absurd. After some time, it was decided to discard the third option. The lady would not have been so skilled in her power if she had not gone to study in the laboratory. Perhaps she is still an enemy who is trying to manipulate the young man by making him fall in love and then killing him. There were many assumptions in his head, but what was happening was too gloomy. The hero again thought about what he should do. The emotions he experienced looking at the tears on the girl's face were fake. If this was so, the situation had changed. He wanted to believe that something would work out for them, because otherwise there would be no reason to live, except for revenge. Since early morning, the lady had been cleaning and running between the tables. She announced that she would be leaving a little early, and the owner waved goodbye. Previously, the assistant always left on time, but for some reason, this time she was in a hurry. The man turned to Anne-Marie. The girl could know the reason since they are close friends. The woman was almost in tears and jumped up, saying that they weren't actually friends. At the festival, the lady met a man who looked exactly like the girl. When she was asked about her brother or sister, the answer shocked her. The lady was an orphan and didn't even know her parents. When Blunt asked for forgiveness, The girl said that everything was fine because there was nothing wrong with it. The blonde made a mistake and rubbed salt into the wound. It shouldn't have been done. She was never asked about her family because her friend had a sense of tact. The green-eyed girl assumed that the lady had been suffering all this time, but was just pretending that it wasn't so. No one knows what's on her mind. That's sad. The girl told the gentleman the story of when her younger sister was saved. It seems that some nobleman was involved. The only member of the family who was taken for granted was Hestia, and the lady is now afraid to even think about what would have happened if she had not been saved. The little girl was always brave, but then she burst into tears in horror. Anne-Marie cannot even concentrate on work because of what happened and does not understand what to do. The lady came to the cemetery. It was quiet around. She called Leo, but he was not there. This seemed even stranger. Usually, he ran as fast as he could because he was always glad to meet. Perhaps the boy went to the city again. The lady soon had an appointment with Odin. She could not stay long. The woman looked around and noticed a ball with teeth marks on it. If she was right among the birds sitting around, there was a laboratory experiment. The heroine pretended not to know where the man had gone and threw away the bread she had bought for the baby. Everyone sitting on the branches immediately pounced on the piece, which greatly distracted them. While she still had the chance, the brunette got ready to head to the prayer room. She was followed by a strange little bird that refused the bread and went forward, hiding behind a column. The lady caught the chick in a web in time to find out where Leo had gone. Only the lab experiments know how to catch the guy. The people from that place left their bird and waited specifically for Arachne to return along the tracks to find out everything. They had a perfectly thought-out plan from the start. As is known, successful experiments absorbing the power of the fragments of ruins lose their human appearance and acquire a new form. Outwardly, such people are either indistinguishable from ordinary people or they can transform the form of animals that they were originally destined to become. Siren belongs to the last option. In the world of the novel, there is no race of beastmen, so for those who survived in the laboratory, there are only two options. The first is to constantly hide, because if you catch people's eye, you will definitely be sold for a good reward. The second option is to live in the shadows your whole life and not go outside. Of course, the woman didn't come in person, but found a way to attract Arachne with the help of her assistants. The girl doesn't understand why it was necessary to catch Leo when it was possible to simply pass a note through the same bird. Perhaps there was an accomplice, because all this didn't happen by chance. The girl doesn't understand what to do next, but confidently moves forward. If Odin were nearby, he would surely quickly find the guy. She suddenly remembered that they had an appointment. If she doesn't show up tomorrow, the young man will be offended all day. If he finds out that it's all because of Siren, he will probably throw an even bigger tantrum. The little bird started screaming when her friend asked how they hadn't torn each other apart yet. It seemed like they were getting along better, since they were both similar. Finally, the lady arrived at the place, or rather, at the black market, on the border of the eastern and western parts. It became clear what they were going to do with Leo, and the animal was sent out on reconnaissance. Anne-Marie walked home and thought about the conversation that she had with the owner of the coffee shop. He had no right to judge, because he was an ordinary barista, but for some reason, it seemed that the lady was very tired. Lately, she had been coming home late, and even worked on weekends. Blunt, however, looks quite exhausted. She is also worried about her sister. The gentleman tried to calm her down. There was no point in blaming herself for everything that happened anyway. It is unlikely that the past will be corrected. After a rest from work, the lady could try something new. The blonde admitted that she really needed a break. She had begun spending less time with Hestia, and this was also directly affecting her. The beauty didn't understand what she had to do, but she tried to convince herself that she had plenty of time ahead to decide on the type of activity. The blonde wouldn't mind working at the coffee shop to become Miss Yuri's colleague, and she promised herself she'd apologize for her tactless questions. When she arrived at her friend's house, she noticed a pile of trash. Someone had left bags right outside the door, which was inappropriate. As she descended, the woman was about to put everything in more secure bags and carry it out when she heard a voice ask her if she was Arachne. Before Anne-Marie could properly react, a rag was pressed to her face. The sedative took effect almost immediately, causing her to fall unconscious. The two who had captured the girl examined her, but were unsure whether she was truly a specimen. They had been told she was strikingly beautiful, but the truth was somewhat different. They had their doubts, but at the same time, it was logical that a random person wouldn't be picking up trash from someone else's house. They hoped it was really Yuri, because if they sold her, they could live a carefree life. The acquaintance they'd been trying to avoid seemed nowhere in sight. One of them voiced his hatred and hoped the man would never return. Someone appeared behind them, and all plans were ruined. Lakio struck one of the kidnappers and sternly ordered the second to open the bag lying on the ground. He wasn't going to repeat it twice, and hinted that it was best to do so. As they say, there was no choice. When the bag opened, white hair appeared. Of course it wasn't Miss Yuri. Carnimal couldn't understand where his friend had gone. She hadn't warned him she'd be back later than usual. Unpleasant thoughts crept into his head again, wondering if the girl had learned of his doubts and decided to hide somewhere far from her home. The young man lowered his eyes sadly and exhaled. He'd made dinner for the lady. It would be nice if she ate first. The man, still sitting on the side of the road, noticed the attacker's mood had suddenly changed. He decided to act, but assumed the boy was just like him. The brunette assumed he was a hunter and gestured toward the blonde, yielding her. The stranger himself wanted to quietly disappear simply to avoid causing any more trouble. A worm inside his head began to wonder what this new fashion was, because he'd never heard of anything like it. Experiments were being conducted in the laboratory involving the implantation of ruin fragments. The surviving children became a new biological species known in Carnomale as specimens. For some reason, Lakios thought he had dealt with all of these, but now he learned there was someone else. He approached, asking if there were more of those hunting the experimental humans. Pinning the man against the wall, the hero ordered him to tell him the whole truth. While they talked, Anne-Marie gradually began to come to her senses. She didn't quite understand what had happened, so she glanced around nervously, her eyes still clouded with ignorance, and the last fragments of her memory hadn't yet returned. The girl finally spotted two people talking in the distance, unsure who they were. One of them was oblivious to the blood flowing from his companion, but Blunt knew it was dangerous and needed to go to the hospital. She couldn't speak aloud. She simply tossed and turned silently. Suddenly, the heroine noticed a body lying in the distance. There was a third person already dead. It became clear as day that she should run. But even so, it was unrealistic because Hestia was still at home. The green-eyed girl remained silent, hoping everyone would disperse. But turning around, she saw feet a meter from her face. The blonde looked around, confused as to what had happened, and unable to remember anything. Hestia stood before her, greeting her little sister. The girl stood motionless in front of the door, still holding the heavy basket. The little girl said she'd gone outside to look for Blunt, but she'd come back. The woman herself was at a loss. She wanted to say something in her own defense, but realized she had nothing to say. After work, she went straight home, but returned late, as if the journey had taken longer than usual. The only excuse she could give for it was fatigue, which is exactly what Anne-Marie did. That conversation with the coffee shop owner came back to her mind pretty quickly. She really needed more rest just to keep from going completely crazy. The girl apologized for coming so late, but promised to make her sister some delicious tomato soup. The worm asked Lakios why he'd left the stranger alive. When it all happened, the young man noticed that the lady had woken up. He even felt a little sad for a second, because if she'd remained unconscious, she probably would have saved her life. The blonde's gaze was focused elsewhere. Carnimal followed the eyes and froze. When an animal senses danger, one of its instinctive tactics kicks in. It either freezes in place and faces the danger head-on, or flees to safety. The woman was looking at the house next to Mrs. Yuri's, and a conversation immediately came to mind. Not long ago, a girl told me about the neighbor's child. She said Hestia lives with her sister. When she can't go to the store, she goes to Arachne's. If that's the same friend, then she and Lakios's lover are close. Their friendship must have lasted for months. Instead of killing the woman, the young man rushed toward her, looked her straight in the eye, and began whispering that she would be better off forgetting everything she had seen, because next time she might actually die. The man completed his ritual and released the woman, leaving her at the door of the house. After the story, Darkness seemed to understand what was going on. The master had only let the girl go out of concern for Yuri. Blue Eyes had simply avoided an unnecessary murder. First, they should have stopped chatting and headed to the black market. The hero assumed that place was somehow connected to the mistress and her lateness. At first, the decision was made to return back to the house. The young man went to look around in that very room and discovered a whole box of masks and those same clothes on mannequins. The blonde wanted to be as careful as possible, so he took one of them to hide his face. There was a knock. It became clear that someone had broken a window, and this was even a little upsetting. Not long ago, the girl had paid a tidy sum to have all the glass replaced, because then the hero said that he saw rats. He felt sorry for all the work he had put into the job. Lachios ran forward, but saw only a raven that landed inside the house. Suddenly, the bird screamed, calling Arachne. According to him, he knew that the girl was at home and wanted to know why she did not come to the meeting. He stated that, with the help of different crows, he tried to find her, but in the end, nothing worked. A second later, it became clear that only Lachios was in the room, who seemed to immediately recognize Odin. The raven immediately began to try to make the sounds that birds were accustomed to, but it seemed to be too late. The blonde grabbed him fiercely and pulled him towards himself. Pretending not to be human was strange in the current situation. The raven tried to bite his hand, but instead, he was tied up so that he would not try to fly away. Carnival had more important things to do, so he decided to leave Odin in the house until he returned and could have a thorough conversation where he would find out all the answers to possible questions. At that time, the girl came to the black market, not just to the street. She made her way into the main building. Of course, getting in there shouldn't have been that easy, so the guards at the entrance asked for the password. Yuri pretended to have forgotten it and begged them to make an exception for her. Once she was given consent, and the words did not end well, as soon as the lady got inside, she immediately chained everyone around her in nets, which caused cocoons to form. It immediately became clear that this was an attack. The head ordered all the doors to be quickly blocked so that no one could leave or enter. The woman did not allow her to do what she had planned. In her opinion, the matter was already troublesome, but now she began to be annoyed by some pawns, making her regret that she had agreed to the task. The brunette had already been in this place, but she could not remember where to go. The corridors were the same. Arachne did visit the black market once on an errand. Cyrena didn't say anything either. She walked her friend to the building and flew away. It won't be possible to contact the woman. Perhaps she broke the connection, or simply flew too far away, ending their conversation. The siren sat in the cage and screamed that she shouldn't have fainted. That bird was the last hope of staying close to Yuri. Now it was all lost. The lady spent all her days in the same place. There were shackles on her hands and neck that did not allow her to turn and leave. She did not know whether that bird, which she had to call so moderately, would come again. In fact, she was afraid that if Arachne did not save her friend, most likely a long and painful death would await her. Blue-Eyed didn't want to die in captivity. She knew that there had to be at least some way out. There were many thoughts in her head, but not all of them were worthy of getting out. She understood that she needed to find a way to contact her old acquaintance, so that the guards standing outside would not hear about it. The people from the lab made the girl sing, assuming that this would attract Arachne, who heard everything. They knew that the lady also had a skill for attracting birds that could be used. The heroine remembered when she was sitting with her friend, and she told her about her true powers. The siren could call birds with the help of an inaudible song. The whole point was that the song had such high notes that ordinary people could not even hear them. The girl herself came up with something so brilliant, she liked everything. Sound is waves that travel through vibrations in the environment. The sound is light but strong. This makes it ideal. The woman used the song to find where the song was coming from, but she didn't know how to get there. Judging by the device, with heavy chains, she realized that if the lock was opened by force, an alarm or a trap would be triggered. Arachne didn't care about the traps, but there could be problems with the alarm. She made her way into the dungeon silently, and what could happen would definitely upset all her plans, making her regret them. The castle the lady arrived at was made with the help of alchemists. The maiden understood that if she made a mistake, it would change its structure, and then it would only get more difficult. Suddenly, a sound was heard immediately. Fear arrived that someone noticed, but it also became clear that the alarm was coming from another room. Some other person had arrived. The lady didn't care what was going on there. She was concerned about her own plan, which couldn't be left to chance. She understood that she would have to try hard to leave peacefully. The woman didn't want to waste her time on this, but despite the situation, she had to achieve the best result. Quickly launching a web into each lock, the heroine tore off the chains when she went down, immediately forming a cocoon around herself in order to make a loud trap. The maneuver served as an excellent distraction. Going down, the maiden smiled, greeting the siren. She was definitely calling for help. Kalian was also downstairs, but no one knew about it. He heard retreating footsteps and realized that he was not completely alone. There behind him, next to him, was a knight who offered to continue what the mission was originally intended for. It's good that they did not attract attention from the outside. They were just lucky. The young man constantly complained that Xenos had decided to refuse. If they could have consulted with him, it would have greatly simplified the task as a whole. Until the man returned, he would be no different from an ordinary person. The squad was not allowed to disclose confidential information to the general public. Searching for children from an orphanage is a very important mission that needs to be accomplished as best as possible. This was precisely the public cause. Everyone was pleased that a rather noble person was sent to search for the children. People trusted him because they knew what he could do. In fact, the main goal was to rescue missing noble children of whom you can count on your fingers. The rest were a bonus. The girl opened the cage where Siren was sitting. She immediately rushed to hug her. It took time for her beautiful wings to grow. The woman could not believe that the beauty really came. She was pleased to see it. A friend, oddly enough, asked where Leo was, and this caused a storm of emotions for her. It was absurd. While Arachne initially went only to find out where her assistant was, everything was obvious from the very beginning. The truthful words made the blue-eyed girl angry. She became seriously furious. After a long time, they finally met, and the friend says that she came only for the sake of the dog, who should not be so dear to her. The brunette should have asked if Serena was healthy or asked how she was doing. The red-eyed woman remained skeptical. She could already see that everything was bad, so she decided not to ask any unnecessary questions. Nodding, the heroine said that she hadn't even missed him. Tears began to roll down her cheeks, and the woman began to scream, crossing all boundaries of reality. The lady didn't understand why her friend was chasing the puppy. She hadn't contacted her since leaving the lab, as if their friendship meant nothing anymore. Siren did the same, but for her, the situation was a little different. They were not the same in their defending conditions. Falling to her knees, the heroine continued to be hysterical. Whether it was snow or rain, she told how she had been constantly watching my lady since she found her, after leaving the laboratory, in which case it would be better to be first on the list of those whom Arachne would go to look for, as soon as she had such an opportunity. Everything came down to accusations. The brunette doesn't understand anything, and she herself was constantly busy, only chatting with the raven and the puppy. She didn't see anything except these two. Serena missed her friend very much. She can't even imagine how much this inexplicable feeling consumed her. The woman exhaled. She was also angry. All the reasons listed should not have become a lever to cause trouble and tell the slave traders where Leo lived. The boy was caught, only thanks to tips. A scream was heard. It was an objection. The beauty did not do this without reason. She was tortured, and it was painful. Turning around, she showed scarlet marks right by her wings. The previous wounds did not have time to heal, as new ones were inflicted on her. All this made her mental health falter even more. The lady could not stand it any longer, so she gave up the location of the dog and Arachne. She didn't want to get her friend into trouble, but she thought that, in any case, everything would be fine. After that strange meeting with the man in the square, no one bothered the lady as if she was under protection. She decided not to think about it for now. Instead, she grabbed Siren and dragged her in a cocoon to the exit. It was finally time to get out. There was hope that the wolf was in the same building as them. The girl no longer had to try to be as quiet as possible. She had all the privileges the heroine asked for: forgiveness, for revealing the location, and for the fact that the individual was now in danger. The woman nodded. She would like to know how much was said about Leo. Besides the reason why he became a dog, the lady laid out absolutely everything. The beauty already understood what would happen there. The man no longer had a reason to hold back. The guy attacked all the guards that were found and tore them to pieces. There was really no need to worry about him, because in fact it was not that difficult to cope with the obstacles. He turned into a full-fledged wolf and prowled the corridors. There was a faint smell of metal all around, the crying of frightened children, the smell of sleeping pills, and something else. It immediately became clear that the boy had arrived back home. The place was not difficult to figure out, given what Arachne had told him before. One day, the lady informed him that Leo would now be considered a guard dog, and the laboratory would be his home. The wolf was allowed to eat strangers and thieves, and no one else. He understood immediately, without even having to explain it twice. From that day on, he followed all the instructions. A voice was heard in the distance. It seemed like someone was there. The blond man went down the stairs. He came because he smelled a familiar smell and wanted to know what kind of animal was howling so aggressively. He didn't quite understand what was in front of him, but he had already made a plan of action. As the wolf slowly began to approach, Lachios quickly grabbed it and threw it into the wall. It seemed that Leo had failed. Even when he opened his mouth to someone so powerful, The impact with the wall seemed to bring him to his senses and made him worry, realizing that he was not at home. The man ordered the animal to sit, unable to resist. He fell down, but still looked around. Until Carnival ordered him to get up, nothing could be done. Such are the conditions of this game. Lakios was told that the captured were being held in the dungeons below, but when he went down, he saw only a dog. Obviously, they had come to the wrong place, otherwise it was quite difficult to explain what was happening. At this point, the wolf began to try to sniff the blonde man. Yuri's scent was coming from the man. To clarify, the young man described the lady in detail, and when the boy heard the word beautiful, he immediately began to smile and wag his tail. He really liked the lady, like no one else. She was special, very different. The worm, as usual, began to occupy all thoughts. He literally screamed that the more details emerged, the more questions arose. The dog emitted the same smell as the girl, which meant she aroused even more suspicion. At this time, the brunette carefully went down and brought Siren down with her too. She heard Leo's howl, but didn't understand where he was. They seemed to have come to the right place. Around them were cages for holding kidnapped children who had just been stolen from aristocrats. Red-Eyed realized they were in the wrong place since Leo wasn't around. She suggested leaving immediately, to which Siren raised an eyebrow in surprise. It seemed like the best solution was to save the defenseless kids. As the two moved forward, the woman continued to mumble in his ear. She knew her friend lived with people, and if she saved the children, she would immediately become a national heroine in the eyes of everyone in the small town. Yuri waved her hand dismissively. She wasn't interested in such things since they still had a mission. The siren pointed to other cells, where not just orphans were sitting, but the children of aristocrats for whom a good reward could be given. Words had no effect again, and she thought it would be better to give up. Arachne saw the situation. They were already in difficult circumstances, so it was not enough to save strangers. The ladies could later ask what she forgot at the black market, so she decided for herself to leave with only two. Walking further down the corridor, the heroine loudly called for her friend. It turned out that the place where he howled was already empty in the hope of help. The beauty turned to the siren, but she did not listen at all. The girl was either crying or angry. She always had problems with this. She said that she was deeply depressed, but then she began to smile like a madwoman. Everyone knew about the lady's character. She had been capricious ever since the laboratory days. Usually, the beauty could get angry for no reason. Every time she saw a friend, she would almost immediately cling to her like a life preserver and start crying, and a few minutes later, she would smile again or get angry. The red-eyed girl didn't quite understand how it all worked. She already knew from her own experience that all feelings are lost when experiments are conducted, but somehow the girl retained them. She would like to return at least some of them to herself, but this remained only in her dreams. Despite the friend's capriciousness, her request to free the innocent children was extremely unexpected. It seemed that during the time they had not seen each other, the lady had changed for the better. But her statements about Leo prove that, in fact, this was not entirely true. The beauty just couldn't seem to grow up and was constantly behaving inappropriately, which only irritated me even more. I had to hit her so that there would finally be silence in the hallway, which would help me focus on what was happening. The brunette didn't understand what had gone wrong. Leo had definitely transformed, but for some reason, everything around was very quiet, as if the entire building had already been destroyed. Another cry from her friend was heard, who said that her wings hurt and asked to be picked up. Arachne didn't react to the request in any way. Leo could have fallen asleep or found a stronger being to subdue him, given his love for human betrayal. The first option was more likely. A scream was heard again. Yuri asked to endure the pain for a little while. She rewound the lady to transport her back home. This is exactly what they did with patients before. There was someone standing in front of him. That's what his friend had tried to warn him about. Kalyan extended his hand, not believing that he had the honor of speaking with the lady from the coffee shop. Crockford wanted to ask what the lady was doing in a dangerous place on the black market. She could have asked exactly the same question. The woman didn't think she'd run into anyone she knew, so she took off her cloak. The heroine quickly assessed her situation, seeing how the knights standing behind the master were exchanging unpleasant glances. Now she truly did look like a slave trader carrying a winged monster. There were no other options left but to start playing the victim. The girl gasped, saying that an unknown person had kidnapped her and then forced her at gunpoint to drag someone along with him. She wanted to deny everything and hoped that the story might work. The squad didn't listen. On the contrary, They became even more angry. The kidnapped person couldn't move without special escort. There is no law that says a beautiful woman can't be bad. One of the leaders ordered to lower their swords. Kalian couldn't explain that he actually knows her because she is a heroine. The brunette raised an eyebrow. She hadn't thought she'd received some kind of title. It turned out that the knight had recently told everyone else that the lady had saved a girl from being run over by a car, doing it completely free of charge. The woman could not consider herself to be one of those who are truly such a heroic person, but fortunately, she understood that this was how she could avoid suspicion from people she did not want her plans to fall apart, and she simply laughed awkwardly. The kidnapped children were released from Crockford's search party, and gradually the lady came to the realization that she was in the first episode of the book. Everything was a little different. Xenos was not in the search party, and Hestia was not among the missing. The unknown place was definitely hiding something, but she had yet to find out what exactly. Everything was calm until Kalian took the initiative into his own hands. He drew his sword, declaring that he would definitely deal with the apostate himself. The sword immediately pointed at Siren, who looked up in surprise. For some reason, it seemed that no one would touch her anymore. Only the power of someone like her could create something so terrible with his whole body and creation. The young man showed that he did not like Siren because she did not look like them. He was focused because he knew exactly what he was going to do as soon as possible. The man approached, while the beauty tried to justify herself. Mrs. Yuri was asked to be careful. After all, she was on the stranger's side. Crockford asked her to stand on his side so as not to be deceived by an unfaithful man. He believed that he understood what was happening and wanted to do everything as delicately as possible. Kalian dared to hint that Serena was behind the kidnapping of children, when in fact she had no idea what was going on. Starting to cry, the girl screamed that because of her, only the dog ended up on the black market. She did not entice anything else. Arachne stood aside and was silent. This was not in the novel, but she managed to understand the essence of what was happening in a few seconds. The turning point has arrived. Everything is so obvious that there is no need to even think about which side should be chosen. The main character will always be a symbol of calm goodness, and the siren hated by many is presented as an exceptional villain who will continue to bother, especially with her differences. The girl should have crossed over to the other side without hesitation, but her mind was racing with the moment when her friend asked about the children and whether Yuri would save them. The woman decided to help anyway, pulling the kids out and asking them to hide behind barrels of alcohol to wait it out, since that way Leo, with his enormous appetite, wouldn't be able to get to them. The lady planned to make a large hole in the wall so that they could then leave quietly. Serena was worried that someone would recognize her friend, but she just waved it off, not understanding why they needed to think about it. She pretended that people could be mistaken. Everything was already known in advance. The girl nodded, and they decided to leave the conversation. The red-eyed woman walked back to the girls and confidently said that she would not go anywhere. If she left, her friend would be killed on the spot. Of course, the mistress was not sure what the prisoner had managed to do, but she knew that she had not committed a crime deserving such a punishment. It was too harsh. No one deserved to die. The woman confidently suggested they talk outside, and a little later they could decide on the punishment. She caught herself thinking that once again she was deciding to save the villain because it seemed easier that way. She looked into his eyes and hoped for favor. If in front of her was the Crockford she knew from the pages of the novel, he would immediately agree. Exhaling, the young man was about to step away, but turning away, he suddenly grabbed his sword and swung again. He shouted that it was the apostate who forced Yuri to say such words simply to play to her advantage. The hero was going to save her, and still do as he originally wanted, thereby killing the stranger. He did not believe a single word. All efforts were in vain. The girl understood that she simply had no choice. She was forced to act, so she had to open the web and defend herself. Kalian began to scream. That in front of him was also an apostate. A strange fire of revenge burned in his eyes that could not be extinguished. The reaction was not entirely normal. Having roughly agreed, the lady turned away. She really belongs to the same camp as Siren. However, thanks to what she was told, she does not even regret making such a choice. In a second, everything became clear. It was even surprising. After escaping from the laboratory, the girl pursued only one goal: to live calmly and peacefully, without bothering anyone. She did not want to be either a good or a bad person. One order was always one good deed. The lady rarely dreamed of wealth and passive income. She didn't care. The woman worked hard and wanted to become a cog in the wheel of the village, where she settled. Now everything fell apart. Everything in an instant. The master cut the web and ordered Russell to find victims in his place, and then take them away, somewhere far away, somewhere there must be many children. Crockford was going to deal with the renegades, and wasn't going to stop so easily. Siren was shouting that they were Arachne's equal, and that could have been considered a compliment. But in reality, the brunette didn't want to fight. She just felt sorry for her past life. Then everything was more or less calm. The woman pushed her friend aside, declaring that it would be dangerous on the battlefield. If she hadn't done that, she would only be hindered. There was clearly no other choice. In Kalian's eyes, the apostate must die. He raised his sword again and asked what her last words would be. Perhaps he had hoped for something until the very end, but it wasn't noticeable. The brunette was unlucky in every sense, but she still entered the fight simply to survive. It gradually became clear that she would not be able to return to the east. She had no choice but to accept her fate and think out a plan of action for the future in some other city where everything would start from the very beginning. The girl tried to fight back, but Crockford was skillful. His gaze was a little frightening, but made it clear that from now on, he would always look at her in this way. There was an unpleasant feeling in her soul, but these feelings were almost not noticeable, because Arachne had not had any emotions since the very generation of power in the damned laboratory. Now Kalian was her enemy. History had been rewritten, and although it was painful to realize, the fact remained a fact. The hero still had to bring the world to harmony, so what was happening was contradictory. In order to live peacefully, after leaving the eastern part, the woman tried to fight with moderate force. The red-eyed one didn't want to do much harm, but the enemy had other motives. It became clear that if she didn't decide to kill, she would have to die herself, and this option was also not suitable. The web was also useless. She wanted to turn the young man's sword against himself, but in the end, even this did not work out. The girl came up with a strategy and carefully tied the stones with threads. When the signal was given, everything would collapse. The beauty decided to pretend to be dead, as if she was crushed by a pile of stones. Then, Leo and Siren would be able to escape just like her. When the enemy noticed what was happening, he cheekily asked if the lady really decided to escape. In some ways, she was sorry that she would never again be able to take advantage of the benefits of the eastern part of the country, but it was better than running from someone who wanted to finish her off. The red-eyed woman didn't care where she lived peacefully, as long as everything around her was normal and she had familiar people from the laboratory. The girl jumped back to let the rocks fall and accidentally bumped into something soft with her back. It turned out that Leo was behind her, who happily began to wag his tail, shouting that he had found the woman. She did not immediately understand how she had been tracked down, but was happy that everything worked out. Crockford raised an eyebrow in displeasure. Either a huge monster or another renegade stood before him. A masked man stepped forward. He didn't care who was in front of him, since he could deal with them one by one. The best way to defeat an enemy is to separate him with support. Everyone is talking about the hero from the east, and Lakios was wondering who he is and why he is so great. Everyone there was nothing special about the man. It was even a little sad that expectations were not met. While Kalian flew to the side on the battlefield, the lady quickly hid behind the wolf's back. She didn't understand that her acquaintance had forgotten her at the black market, and sincerely hoped that he didn't know her. Leo leaned over to the girl and asked if she was hurt. This reached the gentleman's ears, who froze. While the young man was slightly distracted, the brunette recovered and was about to attack again. At the last moment, Carnimal stopped the sword with his bare hands. He should have been calmer, but the eastern dog did not stop screaming. He did not like the very idea of what was happening. The man was not supposed to answer the questions put to him, considering that the enemy did not even have the right to ask them. The sword broke into several pieces. At that moment, the knights returned, who saw the scene of what was happening. They did not understand how this was possible. The gentleman had ordered them to run away long ago, but they didn't do it. They found a child nearby and decided to conduct an additional search to see if there was anyone else in the building. It was all just too suspicious. Someone else arrived, and immediately one of them started shouting, complaining that it was taking too long to catch the specimen. The expensive specimen had been thrown in the corridor, and they picked it up, even though Siren was trying with all her might to escape. They didn't immediately realize that Kalian was in front of them. Immediately, they heard a frightened scream and questions, because they were curious about what had happened. No one had said that the attacker was Crockford. There was chaos all around, but this was a great chance for the heroine. She asked Leo to get ready. the woman was able to snatch the siren, and shouting to the man, giving the command, allowed him to run away and destroy everything around. Kalian managed to react almost immediately and ordered a tracking device to be attached to the girl. The traders had already begun to complain because they knew that the owner would kill them for not having managed to catch the specimen. One asked the other to bring a crossbow so that they could at least get the girl in a dead state. Lakios's voice was heard. He ordered everyone in the room not to move. The man ordered to forget about what happened and to forget about the apostates who had to escape. A few seconds later, a strange feeling appeared. The knights came to their senses and began to look at each other, asking each other how they ended up in the strange corridor. They were looking for the missing children, but then it was as if there was a lapse in memory. The girl returned to work in the morning, as if nothing had happened. She decided that now, she would not have to change her place of residence. To her surprise, she even managed to return to her normal familiar life. After listening to Leo, the lady returned east, just in case the heroine eavesdropped on the search party's conversations, but they contained no mention of the black market goings-on. No one suspected anything. Everyone had truly forgotten everything, but not Yuri. The situation was disconcerting, as she too was bound to lose her memory. The boss pulled her from her thoughts, feeling an ominous feeling. Anne-Marie and Kalian were at the threshold. The guy was smiling, but the lady was not entirely comfortable next to him. She remembered his look. It was the look of a man who sincerely wanted someone dead. The man sat down with the girl at a free table and started talking about something. The lady was sitting at the bar and didn't hear a word. Perhaps the hero was using some alchemical stuff for soundproofing. The red-eyed woman assumed that the couple was flirting and soon became convinced because she saw Blunt's face flush. She wanted to hope that everything would be fine, while Kalian hated the apostates to death. It was even strange. If you think about it in a sense, Anne-Marie was also an apostate, because inside her heart was the power of the ruins which she received by pure chance. In the novel, there were no problems with this fact. The hero either didn't know anything or fell in love with the lady so much that he decided to ignore it. The brunette had too many questions, and it was starting to irritate her. No one was giving answers. 10 minutes later, the man left the coffee shop. The blonde sighed for some reason, thinking that what was offered to her would be too strong. Her friend didn't understand what he was talking about, but she couldn't find the strength to ask again. In novels, if the characters feel something is wrong, they tend to break up. Mrs. Yuri herself was confused about what she was thinking, but in reality, the situation was work-related. The green-eyed woman smiled and assured that there would be no problems. The woman was getting ready to leave. She needed to help in the bakery, where she had taken a job, while she took a leave of absence from the medical center. After work, Arachne went to the prayer house, which was located in the cemetery, where she placed not only Leo, but also Siren. And from the doorway, the girl answered the question about Odin, who never showed up. The heroine nodded. She was a little upset or embarrassed, but at the same time, she was simply confused. She asked to take care of her condition and not fight with the wolf, and then left. The woman also didn't understand that it was strange the raven should have gone to the meeting place, at least after Arachne called him. He really respected her, so this was not the reason. The brunette assumed that the boy was very offended when they met. She would definitely apologize. After that day, the lady again began to live a normal life. She returned home, but for the first time, discovered that the room was completely empty. Lakios was missing.